The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, The Green Fat Attacks. Just as Sherlock was still dazed by Tony's unscrupulous behavior, before he could even express his shock and urge Tony to keep trying, Tony's phone rang. He watched as Tony's expression gradually changed from smug to solemn. By the time he hung up, his face was so gloomy it could drip with water. Watching Tony's expression change so drastically, Sherlock looked at his vengeful uncle with some confusion. "What happened?" Tony asked directly, not evading Sherlock's question. "Where's your TV?" Something happened in New York. Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock and his group didn't hesitate. They led Tony and Happy to the gun shop and turned on the TV across from the cash register. As soon as the TV was turned on, without even having to change the channel, Sherlock saw the battle in New York City. The military had even brought tanks and other vehicles onto the streets. If the live camera from the helicopter hadn't swayed, Sherlock would have been able to discern a cocky figure. The sight even made Sherlock wonder if a coup was imminent in the lighthouse country. Tony's face darkened as he watched the footage on TV, and he finally told Sherlock the details of the call. The call was simple. Black Egg wanted Tony to support the military in taking down the cocky giant. That wasn't a big deal. Even if Black Egg hadn't spoken, Tony, as Iron Man, would have felt obliged. But Black Egg's repeated, subtle insinuations in the caller's voice implied that Tony contacted the sorcerer from the previous night, even citing the size difference between Tony and the monster. This caused Tony's face to darken. On the one hand, he didn't want Sherlock involved in such a dangerous situation, and on the other hand, he was furious that SHIELD hadn't given up on their investigation into Sherlock's identity. After Tony explained the situation to Sherlock, Sherlock expressed indifference and was even a bit eager to try. After all, who wouldn't be curious about the material of Hulk's purple shorts? The mere fact that he could handle Hulk's transformation from XL to XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXL was enough to pique Sherlock's curiosity. After all, those purple shorts were even teased online as being comparable to the Infinity Stone's ultimate shorts. Moreover, Sherlock, a man of fun, declared he absolutely couldn't miss such a moment. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to object, Tony didn't hesitate and immediately called for Happy to bring over his Mark V. As Tony's #1 lackey, Happy naturally trotted over to retrieve a briefcase-sized object from the passenger seat of his G63 pickup truck and tossed it to Tony. Tony briefly told Happy to drive back later, then demonstrated mechanical ascension to Sky's envious gaze. The armor smoothly covered Tony's entire body, and with a roar, Tony flew into the air, transforming into a tiny speck of light. The group dispersed and returned to their shop to continue their work, though each person had a screen in front of them, monitoring the situation in New York City. As for Sherlock, with the help of his uncles, he found a deserted spot and completed his transformation. Seeing Sherlock, dressed like a gentleman and wearing a cyberpunk-style helmet, his uncles gave him a thumbs up. They wondered if their son was much more handsome than Tony, that pretentious Iron Man. This made Sherlock extremely embarrassed, and he vowed never to transform in public again. After sending his uncles away, Sherlock apparated out of his gun shop with a sound of space warping. When Sherlock reappeared, he was already not far from the center of the battlefield. Car wreckage and the screams of the crowd were everywhere. Sherlock didn't immediately rush into the battlefield, but instead began to rescue the injured civilians. It must be said that magic was far more convenient than technology at this time. With the help of the swarm charm and transfiguration, Sherlock cleared the battlefield of civilians in a short time. He even had time to repair the severely damaged buildings, ensuring that the damage would not cause further damage. After completing all this, Sherlock turned his attention to the center of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Tony, relying on the Mark V's mechanical capabilities that surpassed the Mark IV, was already engaged in combat with a military-created abomination. Looking at the khaki-colored abomination covered in spikes, Sherlock was inexplicably reminded of the troll Harry Potter had encountered in his first year. Just as Sherlock was lost in thought, a loud bang beside him interrupted his thoughts. Turning to look, Sherlock realized Tony was struggling to pull himself out of the wall. Abomination, standing in the center of the battlefield, watched Iron Man and Sherlock with interest as they descended from the wall, but didn't attack. Haha, Tony Stark, the most famous and wealthy man in the Lighthouse country, and a rat who doesn't even dare to show his face? Interesting. Now I really want to see what it's like to tear the richest man apart with my bare hands. Tony's expression changed inside the armor as he listened to Abomination's words. He glanced at Sherlock, who was standing nearby, with annoyance. Don't just stand there in a daze. Help me, let's take care of this damn big guy. At Tony's words, Sherlock simply shrugged nonchalantly and casually cast a restore buff on Tony, restoring his damaged armor to like new condition. Then, he looked at Abomination, standing nearby, without a trace of panic in his tone. Tony, you're no good. You're so embarrassed by a thing like this. Tony's fury flared at Sherlock's taunts, secretly resolving to upgrade his suit upon his return. But he maintained a stern exterior. Stop your nonsense, brat. Pay attention. I'm going. With that, he unconcerned with Sherlock's reaction, his thrusters ignited, charging towards the Abomination standing in the middle of the aisle. Sherlock was about to question whether this thing could withstand a single blow from him, but watching Tony charge at the Abomination, he swallowed his words. Since someone had volunteered to be the MT, Sherlock didn't mind playing the role of wizard and having some fun with Mr. Abomination. Chapter 52 The Grudge is Big. Sherlock, intent on merely playing with his mortal enemy, reluctantly agreed to Tony's request, even actively cooperating with him, hoping to develop some combos. However, while he might not have cooperated, Sherlock felt a wave of pain, even regretting even joining in the fun. The reason was simple: Tony's Mark V armor. Sherlock had crafted the Mark V for Tony using the Destroyer armor, incorporating a small amount of alchemy. Furthermore, the Destroyer armor inherently possessed a certain degree of magic resistance, or rather, xenophobia. This alchemy, combined with the magic resistance of the Destroyer's metal, made anchoring magic on the Mark V incredibly difficult, but not impossible. Remember, the Mark V wasn't entirely made of Destroyer armor, it contained countless alloys, all of which proved impervious to Sherlock's magic. But Sherlock didn't dare anchor his magic onto these materials, as they were mostly just wires, skeletons, or some shoddy chips. As a scientific idiot, Sherlock feared damaging the Mark armor's interior and potentially killing his good uncle Tony. As for anchoring Tony inside the suit, the idea was even more ridiculous. Although the Mark V was a lightweight, portable suit, the weight combined with the inertia of Sherlock's magic meant Tony would inevitably be injured if Sherlock dared to use it. So, Sherlock couldn't even coordinate with his good uncle. All he could do was constantly apprehend and cast spells. And the magic he could use was limited, with only a few options available. The first was the blasting spell, which was Sherlock's only offensive magic at his disposal. The reason for this was simple: after Sherlock's enhancements, Tony's suit was no different from a tickle to Sherlock's explosions. The damage to the Abomination breakfast was similarly limited. The second thing was restoration. Sherlock could place this thing anywhere. Placing it on Tony would essentially help Tony repair his armor, but if it landed on the Abomination, it would be useless. After all, even if Sherlock wanted to repair something, the Abomination had nothing to offer. It couldn't compare to the Hulk, who still had a pair of purple shorts, while the Abomination was practically naked. Finally, Sherlock could only use the supporting obstacle spell, creating invisible obstacles to hamper the Abomination's movement, allowing Tony to better engage the massive figure. But as time passed, aside from Tony, who continued to perform his duties diligently and mostly took the beating, both Sherlock and the Abomination grew weary of it. The Abomination had always considered the Hulk its rival, but now he was stuck with a tiny, indestructible tin can. Every time he beat the can, another tin can would appear to repair it. Sherlock, on the other hand, grew increasingly irritated as time passed. He dared not use any truly powerful magic, fearing it would harm his good uncle, as Tony was constantly engaged in combat with Abomination. Weak magic inflicted little damage on Abomination, and under Sherlock's magical healing, Tony, already without any means to counter Abomination, forced a battle into a war of attrition. Sherlock had been tempted to join in the fun, just to see the legendary Hulk in his supposedly indestructible purple pants. But now, not only was Hulk nowhere to be seen, but even the fight, which should have been exhilarating, had become a tedious, drawn-out affair. Sherlock even had a vague feeling that if he could keep buffing Tony, perhaps Tony and Abomination could fight until the end of time. Such a boring fight wasn't what Sherlock, a man of pleasure, wanted. After much deliberation, Sherlock couldn't resist any longer. Determined to injure Tony slightly, He simply fixed the anchor of the spur charm on Tony. With a fierce swipe of Sherlock's wand, Tony, trapped in his armor, felt as if a rope had yanked him back. The force of inertia made him feel as if his internal organs had shifted. The moment he landed, Tony flung open his visor, fell to his knees, pale and wretched. Sherlock, on the other hand, showed no sign of surprise, not even turning his head, his entire focus focused on the abomination. The moment Tony landed, Sherlock's wand swung again, and the full-strength shattering charm blasted out like a cannonball. Abomination, of course, was the first to notice Sherlock's move. Though unsure of the attack's purpose, he immediately raised his arms in a defensive gesture. What the other two didn't anticipate was that just as Sherlock's spell was about to reach Abomination, a green figure plummeted from the sky at breakneck speed, crashing directly into Abomination. Unable to react, Abomination, caught off guard by the green figure, was slammed into the ground, and Sherlock's spell struck it squarely. As Sherlock watched with growing horror, the purple shorts, once considered the finest in the world, began to shatter piece by piece under the spell. A massive green buttocks appeared before Sherlock's gaze. As the buttocks owner, Hulk was naturally the first to notice the change. His entire face contorted in an instant, as if in utter rage. He turned back with a fierce look at Sherlock, who stood there in bewilderment. When Sherlock saw Hulk turning around and looking at him fiercely, he had only one thought in his mind: it's over. This feud has become even bigger. Chapter 53. The thief came to ask for punishment? Seeing the Hulk's expression, as if he wanted to eat him, not only Tony, who hadn't recovered yet, but even Sherlock, who had mastered magic, felt a chill in his spine. Even Sherlock could sense it. The feud between him and the Hulk was complete, and Sherlock had no doubt he would receive even greater treatment than Thor. But Thor was an Asgardian, unlike Earthlings. A punch from the Hulk would only stun him for a moment, but if Sherlock were hit, he would probably be dazed forever. Although Sherlock had made a big deal about his feud with the Hulk, he was clearly underestimating it. After confirming who had ruined his clothes, the Hulk even threw away the abomination that had been planted in the ground, found a tree by the roadside, and simply modified it into a grass skirt. Then, he strode towards Sherlock, clenching his massive fists until they cracked. Sherlock's trigeminal nerves twitched at the sight, and he quickly waved his hands and began backing away, shouting that it was a misunderstanding. But it seemed the Hulk had no intention of listening to Sherlock's explanation, continuing to advance towards Sherlock. Sherlock chuckled bitterly inwardly. Damn it. He'd just been trying to be serious, and he'd accidentally injured the Hulk who'd fallen from the sky. This was pure, unprovoked misfortune. If only he had known better, he wouldn't have tried to challenge the Hulk's opponent. Wouldn't it have been better to just be Tony's nanny? Sherlock chuckled bitterly inwardly, backing away while trying his best to explain to the Hulk. But the Hulk seemed to have no intention of listening to Sherlock's explanation, continuing to advance towards Sherlock. At this moment, a spark suddenly appeared behind Sherlock, instantly forming a portal. Sherlock, staring intently at the Hulk and backing away, had no idea what was happening behind him. He stepped into the portal, and just as the Green Man reacted and rushed to pull Sherlock out, the portal closed in an instant. Sherlock vanished from the battlefield. Having lost his target, the Green Man grew increasingly furious, venting his anger on the poor abomination. Meanwhile, Sherlock, having stepped into the portal, realized he was already in Camartage just as it closed. Bewildered, Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief, then turned to see the Ancient One standing behind him, a smile on his face. The Ancient One seemed to be incredibly knowledgeable about the recent events, sizing Sherlock up. Sherlock was unnerved by the Ancient One's gaze, but he still managed to greet him. After all, compared to the enraged Green Man, the Ancient One was still able to communicate, wasn't he? Master Ancient One, Sherlock bowed slightly, a greeting that amounted to a simple greeting. While he didn't know what the Ancient One wanted to talk to him about, he undoubtedly had solved a major problem for him. If it weren't for the Ancient One, he'd probably have been fighting the Hulk until his brains were pounded out. Good taste. Responding to Sherlock's greeting, the Ancient One, his eyes full of smiles, said something nonsensical. For a moment, Sherlock's expression froze beneath his mask. Sherlock couldn't tell if the Ancient One had noticed the origins of his equipment or was teasing him for accidentally ripping the Hulk's pants. With sweat dripping down his forehead, Sherlock decided to get down to business and skip the topic. After much deliberation, Sherlock bowed slightly and said to the Ancient One, Master Ancient One, I wonder what you want from me. Seeing Sherlock looking nervous, the Ancient One smiled to himself, turned back to the tea table, poured himself a cup of tea, and then spoke slowly. No big deal. I simply want you to go to Asgard with me to confront someone. It would have been fine if the Ancient One hadn't said anything, but once he did, Sherlock's forehead was sweating profusely. Huh? What? Asking him and the Ancient One to confront someone? Are you sure you're not confronting yourself? You have to remember that at this moment, Sherlock had transformed Odin's destroyer armor into a suit and was wearing it. Wearing someone else's things to confront someone else? Isn't it like an old man eating arsenic, thinking he's lived too long? Sherlock knew the Ancient One was a tough guy, practically a master of the universe, but he never imagined he would be so arrogant as to go to someone else's territory and confront someone else. Sherlock didn't seem to react at all, just making an old man's subway expression at the Ancient One, though he couldn't see through the mask. Faced with Sherlock's question, the Ancient One remained calm, taking a sip of tea before speaking. Is there anything you don't understand? Earth is still Earth. Faced with the protection of Camartage, Odin abandoned Thor without warning. His child, Loki, even sent his destroyer armor to wreak havoc. What's wrong with me going there to demand justice? It seemed like Sherlock had never seen such a strong Ancient One before. Although there was nothing wrong with what Ancient One said, Sherlock silently gave Ancient One a thumbs up. A boss is a boss. But the idea of wanting Sherlock to go with him still made Sherlock hesitate. After all, he had quietly taken someone else's belongings and refined them into his own equipment. Wearing someone else's belongings and going to their territory to demand justice seemed a bit excessive to Sherlock. Well, Master Ancient One, I won't go. Look, isn't it a bit inappropriate for me to go? Sherlock finally managed to say this after a long pause. Seeing Sherlock's hesitation, Ancient One simply smiled. After taking a sip of tea, he spoke as if talking to himself. You're not going? What a pity. The magic books in the library in Asgard seem to be out of your reach. If I remember correctly, Asgard has its own unique magic. Sherlock interrupted Ancient One before he finished speaking. Facing the temptation of magic, Sherlock simply couldn't resist. Go. I'll go. Master Ancient One, I will definitely go. After hearing Sherlock agree to his request, Ancient One put a smile on his face again, looked at Sherlock and continued. Then go back and pack your luggage. Remember to change out of this outfit and hide it. You will go as a student of Camartage, my disciple. Don't forget to say hello to your family. Chapter 54 Preparations Before Departure. After hearing the Ancient One's words, Sherlock broke out in a cold sweat again. He couldn't hide the source of his voice from the Ancient One, so Sherlock could only agree with an awkward laugh. Seeing Sherlock's agreement, the Ancient One nodded in satisfaction and continued. All right, I'll wait here. Once you're done packing, come over and we'll leave for Asgard. With that, the Ancient One waved his hand at Sherlock. With his gesture, a portal suddenly appeared beside Sherlock, shimmering with sparks. On the other side of the portal lay Sherlock's bedroom. Seeing that the Ancient One had already opened a portal for him, Sherlock didn't hesitate and stepped through it, returning to his gun shop. He gently pressed the energy source on his collar cord, and Sherlock's suit, crafted from the destroyer armor, began to flow like liquid toward the collar buckle. In just a few breaths, Sherlock had returned to his pre-departure appearance, dressed in casual attire, looking surprisingly ordinary, except for being a bit more handsome. Without hesitation, Sherlock removed his tie and tossed it into his library. Then, he hurriedly grabbed a few changes of clothes and tossed them into the suitcase he had prepared long ago. Sherlock had made the suitcase himself, similar to Newt's, though not quite as spacious, about the size of an RV. This was Sherlock's second time making it himself. The first was during a trip, but after it was smashed by Meowth's hammer, Sherlock had to make a new one upon returning home. This time in Asgard, Sherlock was sure to see Thor. Thinking of that idiot and the pervasive drunkards of Asgard, Sherlock quickly ran to Gates' office in Zioking and stole 2 bottles of fine wine to add to his suitcase. After finishing everything, Sherlock reluctantly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, as if a thought had struck him, he ran to the infirmary in the training center behind the gun shop with a smirk on his face, grabbed a few bottles of alcohol, and stuffed them into his suitcase. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that upon exiting the infirmary, he saw someone else, none other than Price's adopted daughter, Lorna. Lorna instantly spotted Sherlock and the suitcase in his hands. The clever little girl immediately realized that Sherlock was about to leave. She immediately clung to Sherlock's thigh, insisting on going out with him. Normally, Sherlock would have agreed to take the little girl out for some sightseeing and a few bites. But this time, Sherlock was going to an alien planet. Asgard, to be honest, was a completely alien place. Moreover, this time, he was going to confront the Ancient One. It wouldn't look good if I went there with my family. If I really took Lorna away for 10 days or even a month, there was no telling if Price would kill me when I returned. Just going to Asgard would be embarrassing enough. Was I here with the Ancient One on business, or was I just here for a family vacation? The little girl's cries quickly attracted Sherlock's uncles and Skye, who was sitting at the front desk. They initially thought someone had bullied little Lorna, and when they rushed over, they spotted Sherlock sneaking around with a suitcase. They were shocked to see Sherlock there. After all, on TV, the Hulk, the Abomination, and Tony were fighting each other to the point of beating their brains out. Add to that the military's occasional disruptions on the periphery, and downtown New York was in utter chaos. They assumed Sherlock was either at Tony's mansion with Pepper Potts or supporting Tony on the outskirts of the battlefield. He shouldn't be here. After discussing the entire situation with Sherlock, the others finally understood why Sherlock was there. Even with little Lorna crying so hard, Sherlock had refused to take her out to play. Although they didn't know what Camartage and Asgard were, they understood Sherlock was on a serious mission. It was Price's intervention, coupled with Sherlock's repeated assurances that he would return with gifts, that finally brought little Lorna to a stop. After greeting everyone, Sherlock went back to the shop and filled a box with weapons and ammunition before returning to his room, satisfied. The reason for the ammunition was simple: since Sherlock had decided to go to Asgard, he naturally needed to use magic. However, Sherlock's own magic, drawn from the Harry Potter universe, was too powerful, and he didn't intend to use it in front of Odin and the others. After all, Odin wasn't the Ancient One. While the Ancient One could conceal Sherlock's special abilities for the sake of Earth's safety, Odin, as king of Asgard, had Asgard first in mind, not Sherlock. Sherlock had already made plans. Upon arriving in Asgard, he would employ the magic of Camartage. While his own Camartage magic differed slightly from the real thing, he could use the difference to trick people. He'd also brought firearms to enhance his attack power. After all, for an Asgardian, firearms were incredibly powerful. Even if they didn't kill him, a bullet would be incredibly painful. As for Sherlock's primary purpose for going to Asgard, he'd already figured it out: Loki's illusion. Sherlock would always remember the TV series, where the elderly Loki conjured up the entire Asgard from thin air. Moreover, neither the magic of Camartage nor the magic of Harry Potter contained illusions. Sherlock had long coveted Loki's ability to even simulate his own illusions. After packing everything up, Sherlock opened the portal to Camartage and walked through confidently, though he felt as if he'd forgotten something. But the allure of this new magic quickly overcame any slight awkwardness, replaced by a surge of anticipation for Asgard, like the anticipation of a school outing in elementary school. Seeing Sherlock's return, Ancient One no longer hesitated, drank the tea from his cup, and opened the portal to Asgard. As the magnificent side of Asgard gradually unfolded before his eyes as the portal opened, Sherlock forgot everything else and was left with only admiration for the Asgardian culture. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55: Asgard. As the Ancient One opened the portal, the entirety of Asgard gradually appeared before Sherlock's eyes on the other side. Although he had seen this magnificent city countless times in movies, and even witnessed its destruction, seeing it with his own eyes, seemingly made of gold, still left Sherlock inexplicably awestruck. Asgard seemed like a vast, city-like spaceship, floating quietly in the vast universe. Houses, farmland, and lakes all coexisted within this vast city. There was no shroud above the city, but miraculously, there was no pressure imbalance when the portal opened, as if the entire universe were filled with air. Out of courtesy, the Ancient One's portal didn't open directly within Asgard itself, but rather on the broken Rainbow Bridge, allowing Sherlock to see the entirety of Asgard. Illuminated by an unknown light, The entirety of Asgard resembled a fine work of art made of gold, with a castle, towering in the center, shimmering with golden light in particular. The mesmerizing color alone was enough to captivate Sherlock, who was actually seeing the city for the first time. Even though he was a novice, Sherlock still declared it his dream city. The Ancient One ignored Sherlock's thoughts and, after the portal opened, immediately stepped through. Seeing the Ancient One's movements, Sherlock felt something was amiss. Glancing at the Ancient One's bright yellow monk's robes, then at his own comfortable casual clothes, Sherlock slapped his head in exasperation. With a casual touch, his casual clothes quickly transformed into the same monk's robes worn in Camartage. Sherlock nodded in satisfaction and followed the Ancient One through the portal. Once Sherlock truly set foot on Asgard, his curiosity could no longer be contained, and he began to explore. He was particularly drawn to the Rainbow Bridge, which had been shattered by Thor's hammer. Even though it had lost its vibrant color, Sherlock was still incredibly curious about it. After all, in Thor, Ragnarok, this thing was capable of destroying entire nations. If you put it in context, it's practically identical to the Death Star in Star Wars. It's even fair to say that the entirety of Asgard is a replica of the Death Star, with the Bifrost essentially serving as the main gun of this massive city-state. Sherlock's expression darkened at the thought. Once he'd conceived this scenario, he couldn't bear to look upon the only official means of entry and exit to Asgard. For some reason, Sherlock felt like this thing was no different from the cannons he'd seen at circuses as a child, where people were shoved into and fired. With his expression growing increasingly baffled, Sherlock couldn't help but kneel down and touch the Asgard main gun. The strange feel piqued his interest in the Bifrost. The Bifrost felt like a mixture of stone, metal, and a hint of glass. Sherlock couldn't fathom how it could transmit such immense energy to destroy a planet. Ancient One looked at Sherlock, who was like a curious baby, but he was not in a hurry. After satisfying most of Sherlock's curiosity, he reminded Sherlock to follow him closely, as the people of Asgard were already waiting. After hearing Ancient One's instructions, Sherlock finally restrained his curiosity and followed Ancient One closely as he began to walk towards Asgard at the end of the Rainbow Bridge. As the two of them moved forward, the outline of the entire city of Asgard became clearer and clearer in Sherlock's eyes. Sherlock also saw Heimdall, the gatekeeper of Asgard, standing at the end of the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall was still wearing the golden armor with a pair of horns. Sherlock was extremely impressed by this gatekeeper of Asgard, especially the uncle's unusual eyes. Before the time travel, Sherlock saw people speculating online about the location of various gems before the release of Avengers: Endgame. Some speculated that Heimdall's eye was the legendary Soul Stone, the gem that allowed Heimdall to see the distant Earth from Asgard. Now that he had seen the real person, Sherlock grew even more excited. Fortunately, the Ancient One was still with Sherlock, and Sherlock still had some common sense and didn't rush over to ask for an autograph. As the Ancient One and Sherlock approached, Heimdall, standing at the end of the Rainbow Bridge, hurried forward to greet them. "Respected Sorcerer Supreme, please follow me. The carriage is ready, and the God King awaits your arrival in the palace." Heimdall nodded and followed Heimdall toward the carriage. As a relatively unknown figure, Sherlock naturally followed closely. Led by Heimdall, the two boarded a resplendent carriage. After they settled in, the carriage automatically started and began its journey towards Asgard. As the carriage journeyed deeper into Asgard, Sherlock felt his eyes almost stretched thin. The entire interior of Asgard gave Sherlock the feeling of a sci-fi version of medieval Europe. Add to that the shops selling magical items, and Sherlock inexplicably felt a touch of the gilded Hogsmeade. The carriage journeyed for a while before approaching the magnificent castle at the heart of the city. From a distance, Sherlock hadn't seemed much of a sight, but now, beneath the castle's surface, the towering majesty of its presence was palpable. Outside, someone resembling a minister was already waiting for the two. After the carriage stopped, this minister-like figure led Sherlock and Ancient One into the castle. Sherlock observed everything with the curious gaze of a child. No wonder he looked so unworldly. After all, including his two previous lives combined, this was Sherlock's first encounter with an alien civilization. Under the guidance of Dachin, Sherlock followed the Ancient One to the Hall of God King Odin. By then, the hall was filled with the most important figures in Asgard. God King Odin sat on his throne atop a dais, clutching his spear. Frigga, the queen of the gods, stood beside him. Beneath the dais, facing the gate, stood figures resembling Asgardian ministers. Naturally, Thor, Odin's son, was among them. Chapter 56 The Tacit Understanding Between Men. Sherlock spotted Thor standing among the ministers almost instantly. The reason was simple: Thor, standing among those seemingly ministers, was like a husky among wolves. Furthermore, amidst the solemn faces, Thor's expression was incredibly expressive, one of shock. Sherlock even suspected that if this were a Disney anime set, Thor's jaw would have dropped to the ground. Of course, as a familiar friend, Sherlock could still decipher Thor's shock from his expression. "Why the hell are you here?" Sherlock simply rolled his eyes in annoyance at Thor's question, glancing at the Ancient One beside him. His meaning was clear. Guess why I'm here? Thor and Sherlock had been together for so long, so he naturally understood Sherlock's thoughts. He understood Sherlock's hint almost instantly, and the next moment, Thor had the expression of an old man on the subway. "You're actually a mage? You didn't tell me yet." "I'm your friend." Watching Thor's expression transform from that of an elderly man on the subway to that of a tough, pathetic man, Sherlock practically got goosebumps all over his body. He even ignored the nearby exchange between Ancient One and Odin, completely focused on a telegram with Thor. "You didn't even ask, what can I do? And you know the mages of Midgard rarely come out." Thor was stunned for a moment at Sherlock's wink, but the next second his expression grew even more aggrieved, staring intently at Sherlock standing next to Ancient One. "Fuck, you're so mean. When Loki attacked me, you, a mage, didn't even come to help." Sherlock, understanding Thor's meaning, rolled his eyes. The meaning was clear. "First, I wasn't there. Second, that's your family matter. Why would I, an outsider, interfere? And finally, I haven't even asked you to compensate me for my beloved car yet." Thor, understanding Sherlock's intention, was visibly stunned for a moment, then looked a little embarrassed, as if apologizing for damaging Sherlock's car again. Seeing Thor's idiotic expression, Sherlock felt he was hopeless. He covered his face in frustration, saying it was okay, someone else would compensate him. Thor, understanding Sherlock's intention, visibly brightened. Amidst the solemn ministers, Thor's demeanor became even more playful, happily watching Sherlock standing beside the Ancient One as he continued to wink and make faces, conveying information to Sherlock. "Well, since you're here, I'll buy you a drink after we're done. You must try Asgardian wine, it'll leave you wanting." Sherlock gave Thor a sullen look, his meaning clear. "Let's talk later. We have business to tend to." After conveying his feelings, Sherlock planned to listen to what the Ancient One and Odin had been saying, but it was clear Thor wasn't about to give up his hard-earned opportunity and was determined to continue communicating with Sherlock. Standing behind the Ancient One, facing the Asgardians, Sherlock couldn't ignore Thor's constant winks. Helplessly, Sherlock gave Thor a questioning look. Question mark. Seeing Sherlock finally back online, Thor visibly grew excited and continued to wink and sent Sherlock more messages. "How's Jane? Tell me quickly, how's Jane now? I miss her so much." Sherlock, who had just returned online, was immediately fed a mouthful of dog food by Thor. He rolled his eyes in annoyance, silently cursing, "Damn love-struck dog." Then he began to wink and sent Thor signals. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm trying to figure out how to see you again." Upon seeing Sherlock's message, Thor's face visibly flushed, almost a touch shy, sending chills down Sherlock's spine. Can you imagine the shyness of Su Jinjiang, a man over 1.8 meters tall and weighing 200 kilograms, capable of running a horse? Thor's shyness faded just as quickly. As if remembering something, Thor watched with anticipation as Sherlock continued to read his message. "By the way, how did you get here? I think the Rainbow Bridge is broken." In response to Thor's question, Sherlock surreptitiously drew a circle with his hand, his meaning clear. Kamatage's exclusive spell, Portal. Seeing Sherlock's expression, Thor's eyes lit up, staring intently at Sherlock's slightly trembling hand, his entire being filled with hope. "Portal? Can we go back to the atrium? I want to see Jane. You know, with the Rainbow Bridge broken, I won't be able to see Jane in the atrium anymore. My father and mother are against me leaving Asgard at this moment." Sherlock suddenly felt uneasy watching Thor, who gleamed with hope like a puppy. Perhaps it was the anger of a single man, but after a moment of pretentious reflection, he shook his head slightly. "It's unlikely. The Ancient One could create such a long-distance portal. I'm not good enough to open one." Sherlock, though outwardly regretful, was actually beaming with joy. His anti-love alliance with Daisy Lewis had finally reached a historic milestone. Seeing Sherlock seemingly reject him, Thor visibly lost his temper, completely oblivious to the cunning look in his eyes. Despite his moment of disappointment, Thor didn't seem to give up. After a brief moment, he regrouped and looked at Sherlock eagerly. Sherlock naturally noticed the change in Thor and waited for him to continue delivering his message. But for some reason, Thor, who had been excited, suddenly became serious. His expression quickly became expressionless, and he looked extremely serious, as if the person who had just been winking at Sherlock wasn't him. Sherlock was confused by Thor's change of heart, completely unsure of what had happened, but he subconsciously felt something was amiss. The next second, Sherlock's feeling was confirmed when the Ancient One's voice rang out in his ear. "So, are you done chatting with Thor, son of God King Odin?" Instantly, goosebumps covered Sherlock's skin, as if he'd been caught passing notes in elementary school. He turned around with an embarrassed look on his face. It wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't looked, but once he did, Sherlock felt like he was on the verge of social demise. Throughout the hall, not only the Ancient One, but also God King Odin, God Queen Frigga, and the other ministers, all had their eyes fixed on him and Thor. Everyone's expression was one of anticipation. Chapter 57 The Magic of Asgard. Compared to Sherlock, who was practically stamping his feet on the ground in embarrassment, Thor's skin was thick as a fortress wall. He fully embraced the principle that if I wasn't embarrassed, then it was someone else who was embarrassed. He simply stood there with a blank expression. No matter how Sherlock tried to signal him, Thor remained silent, his expression aloof, like a classmate who, when caught by the teacher, tried to evade responsibility. Sherlock cursed Thor inwardly 100 times, his mind racing with thoughts of how to ease the current awkwardness. Just as Sherlock felt his social death was imminent, Thor's mother, Frigga, sighed helplessly and stepped forward to help Sherlock. "I can see, little one, that you have a good relationship with my foolish son. He caused you so much trouble in the courtyard." Frigga's words were like a spring breeze, caressing Sherlock's mortified heart. Grateful, Sherlock looked at the gentle Frigga and replied with a slight bow. "You're welcome, Queen God. Thor is my good friend, and it's my duty to look after him." Queen God Frigga smiled gently at Sherlock's politeness before continuing. "Just call me Frigga. I know my son. This foolish boy must have caused countless troubles. Well, enough about him. Come with me. King Odin has already discussed this with your teacher, the Ancient One." With that, Queen God Frigga turned and began to lead Sherlock away. Sherlock glanced at the Ancient One standing beside him. The Ancient One, unfazed by Sherlock's distraction, smiled and nodded. Seeing the Ancient One nod, Sherlock felt reassured and followed Queen God Frigga out of the hall. Along the way, Frigga led Sherlock, explaining the layout of the palace and the purpose of each room, as if she were visiting a classmate's mother. Only when Frigga led Sherlock to a golden double door did she pause her introduction and slowly push it open. Beyond the doorway lay a vast library. While not as vast as Sherlock's own, it was still comparable in size to the one at Hogwarts. After leading Sherlock in, Frigga looked around curiously and said, "This is the Library of Asgard. All of Asgard's magic resides within this library. You can find the catalog of the spellbook you need in the mirror in the center, called Bragi," Frigga said, pointing to the large mirror-like object in the center of the library. "God King Odin and the Ancient One have agreed that you have a full 15 days to learn any magic in the library. I can decide that the time will start tomorrow, and today's time is free for you. This is to thank you for taking care of the willful Thor, who has lost his power, in the atrium. Please don't refuse. I know this time is short, but it is the greatest convenience I can grant you. After all, you don't belong to Asgard." After hearing Frigga's words, Sherlock quickly bowed and thanked her. "Well, esteemed Lady Frigga, thank you for your generosity." Seeing Sherlock's face full of anticipation yet struggling to contain himself, Frigga simply smiled and waved at Sherlock. "All right, little one, I won't bother you anymore. Keep studying hard." With that, Frigga walked out, closing the library door behind her. The moment the door closed, Sherlock cheered and eagerly ran to the large mirror called Bragi to search for the magic book he needed. For 16 days, Sherlock barely left the library except for essential physiological needs. Even sleeping and eating. Sherlock relied on the nutrients and stimulants in his potions. Sherlock first spent 5 days gaining a general understanding of the basics of Asgardian magic, then, with Bragi's assistance, began to search for spells of his own. While learning about Asgardian magic, Sherlock quickly discovered something peculiar. According to the library's basic magical knowledge, Asgard was a civilization built on magical technology. Logically, the people of Asgard should have used this technology to create artifacts like magic cannons, magic star destroyers, and at the very least, magic pistols. However, the surprising thing was that despite the magical technology that allowed Asgardian warriors to forge powerful artifacts, their primary fighting style still relied heavily on cold weapons. This baffled Sherlock, who ultimately attributed the Asgardians' immortality to the Asgardians. Asgardian scientists like Newton, Einstein, and Faraday had a far greater impact on Asgard than Earth scientists had on Earth civilization. After learning the basics, Sherlock naturally came into contact with Loki's illusion magic. Of course, beyond illusion magic, Sherlock also discovered a remarkable form of magic within Asgard called sequence magic. While the name itself might not be familiar, anyone who has watched Tanya's War will be familiar with sequence magic, the magic cast by the Sorn magicians with their rifles. On the Asgardian side, these sequence magic spells are unique to archers, and unlike the variety seen in Tanya's War, they consist of a few basic types: penetrating, explosive, and defensive. Archers can continuously optimize their magic sequences to increase their range, power, and defensive capabilities. Sherlock, envious, eventually added this so-called sequence magic to his learning list, ultimately dedicating only 6 days to illusion magic and 5 to sequence magic. Due to the tight schedule, Sherlock had no time to experiment with his newly learned magic. He could only memorize it as best he could, waiting for further practice. And so, on the 16th day, the library door slowly opened, and Sherlock, with his giant panda eyes, appeared at the entrance, looking like a homeless person from nowhere, to Thor, who greeted him enthusiastically. "What the hell, what were you doing in the library? I'm not as miserable as you are." Even when I was wandering around on Earth, Thor couldn't help but exclaim in surprise at Sherlock's appearance. Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance at Thor's question and replied weakly, "Stop talking nonsense, Thor. Help me get washed up and get something to eat. I think I could eat a whole cow. And then I need a good night's sleep." Chapter 58 The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard, 1. After hearing Sherlock's complaints, and seeing how he looked like he was about to die, Thor and the others didn't hesitate any longer. They all rushed to lift Sherlock up and headed out. Without the help, Sherlock could still manage to stay awake. But with the shoving and shaking, Sherlock felt overwhelmed. His eyelids felt as heavy as a mountain. With no other options, Sherlock could only summon up his last bit of strength and consciousness to shout, "Let's go eat first." With those words, Sherlock felt his eyelids slumbering, and he fell into deep sleep, as if he were unconscious. Unbeknownst to Sherlock, even though his consciousness had fallen into deep sleep, and even a snot bubble had appeared on Sherlock's nose after he fell asleep, his body had not. Perhaps the nearly 2 weeks of starvation had left Sherlock's body ravenous, coupled with the commands he'd given it before losing consciousness. Even though Sherlock was asleep, his body kept repeating, "Eat first. Eat first." This situation would be a horrific event, not just on Asgard, but even on Earth. Throughout recorded history, it's only been seen in the popular comics on China's largest island, Zio-Rezi Island. It's never happened in reality. Everyone paused, seemingly torn between whether to obey Sherlock and eat first, or get the man, who was about to die, to the infirmary. Everyone was torn between the doctor and the chef, but Thor finally made the decision. Whatever. Since his brother had spoken, he'd obey and eat first. Following Thor's foolish decision, everyone rushed to carry Sherlock to the castle's mess hall. Once there, Sherlock's reaction was as sharp as a knife pulling a butt, a revelation. Of course, it was the people of Asgard who were the first to open their eyes. The reason was simple: after they had placed Sherlock on a chair in the dining hall, he continued to call for food. Someone was still trying to test him, and as the palace chef, he couldn't ignore him. He quickly brought Sherlock a meal. But as everyone was still wondering how to eat for Sherlock, who was either asleep or unconscious, something astonishing happened. Sherlock, already asleep, seemed to smell the food. Though his consciousness was still dormant, his body, driven by magic and a desire to survive, moved on its own. Table manners were completely absent, and Sherlock, like someone starving, grabbed food with both hands and stuffed it into his mouth frantically. The meal was quickly emptied out in this extremely primitive way, and then he began to repeat his original words, "Let's eat first." As the royal chef of Asgard's palace, the chef saw this and realized, "Oh, this guy clearly isn't full. He rolled up his sleeves and began to work furiously in the kitchen. Gradually, the chef noticed something was amiss. Sherlock looked thin compared to Thor's burly physique, but his stomach was a bottomless pit, cramming anything he could find. An hour had already passed, and Sherlock was still repeating, "Let's go eat first." Not only the chef, but even the onlookers noticed something was amiss with Sherlock and began to boo him. Especially Thor, the playful and nosy Thor, even led the discussion about what to stuff Sherlock with to satisfy him. This included, but was not limited to, excrement, textiles, including but not limited to clothing, flags, etc., leather goods, including but not limited to belts, shoes, and armor. Metal items, including but not limited to various weapons and armor, wooden items, and household items, including but not limited to various soaps and toothpaste. Someone even started a gambling ring and invited everyone to place their bets. Fearing a potential disaster, the chef called on his friends to help speed up the food preparation while simultaneously searching for a doctor. Just in case the idiots outside had fed the Asgardian guest something unpleasant, a doctor would be readily available. However, the chef was surprised to learn that upon arrival, the doctor joined the group of people led by Thor. Unlike Thor, however, the doctor was even more curious about Sherlock's condition. Sherlock's seemingly bottomless stomach in particular intrigued the doctors. The entire castle was abuzz with the excitement, and many even rushed to the cafeteria to watch the fun unfold. Ultimately, the fun came to an end with the arrival of Frigga, the Queen of Gods. After all, when Frigga arrived, Thor was secretly trying to force his meow hammer into Sherlock's mouth. Frigga stopped Thor's erratic behavior and angrily scolded her own son. Seeing that Sherlock had almost finished eating, she ordered Thor to carry the satiated but still drowsy Sherlock to the infirmary for an examination. Then, he was taken to the bathroom to be cleaned up, and then a clean guest room was found for Sherlock to rest. Under the pressure of the goddess Frigga, the farce was aborted before it even began. Thor, caught on the act, though reluctant, obeyed his mother's orders, picked up the snoring Sherlock, and urged the doctors to follow. Frigga followed the doctors throughout the entire process, not missing the glint in their eyes. She even wondered if she wasn't there. These doctors, deeply interested in Sherlock, would secretly perform an autopsy on him to determine how he had managed to eat so much, and then quietly heal him. Don't doubt it, Asgard does have such technology. Fortunately, Thor and Frigga followed the whole process, which saved Sherlock from the disaster. He was safely thrown into the bathtub by Thor, washed clean, and then thrown on the bed in a guest room. Chapter 59, The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 2. Sherlock slept for 2 solid days, only waking slowly on the morning of the 3rd day. Snuggled in bed, Sherlock stretched comfortably, winking. He casually grabbed a bottle of water from his library, sat up, and gulped down the entire bottle before finally drinking a satisfied sip. But the next moment, Sherlock's sated expression vanished without a trace. He froze in place, as if struck by a pressure point. The reason was simple: Sherlock realized he wasn't in his bedroom. And most importantly, Sherlock's clothes vanished without a trace. In that moment, Sherlock's mind raced through a series of melodramatic TV dramas. After a while, his wits slowly began to pick up, and Sherlock remembered he was still in Asgard. But as his wits began to pick up, Sherlock's expression darkened. He was already in Asgard, so where had his clothes gone? Sherlock lay on his bed with a look of despair, wrapped tightly in the quilt, and began to try to think about what had happened. However, after a while, Sherlock could only recall that he had fallen asleep and didn't know anything else. Seeing that his memory seemed to be in vain, Sherlock felt as if he had drunk too much. He took out some clothes from the suitcase he had left in the library, and just as he got up and was about to change, the door to Sherlock's room was pushed open. Sherlock was so scared by this guy that he almost jumped back onto the bed at the fastest speed in his life and wrapped himself tightly in his quilt. Fortunately, the person who pushed open the door was not the beautiful girl or the burly man that Sherlock had imagined, but a maid. After seeing Sherlock wrapped in the quilt and looking terrified, the maid was stunned for a moment, and then asked with a look of surprise, "Greetings, distinguished guest, you've finally awakened. Lord Thor has visited you more than once while you were asleep." After hearing the maid's words, Sherlock calmed down a bit. Most importantly, he didn't feel anything strange, which put his mind at ease. After pondering for a moment, Sherlock turned to the maid. "Excuse me, how long have I been asleep, and what exactly happened while I was asleep?" The maid paused for a moment, then smiled and gave Sherlock a brief account of what had happened. She calmly explained that she knew nothing about the bet between Thor and his gang, and that all the information she had heard was just hearsay. Sherlock's expression grew increasingly strange as he listened, especially the mess in the cafeteria. It felt like he was reading a comic book. After all, how could he not have known he'd eaten the gum-gum fruit? How else could he explain the fact that he could possess Luffy's abilities? And even eat while sleeping? Could it be that his last name wasn't Phoenix but Monkey? This is outrageous. It's outrageous to open the door like this. After a while, Sherlock finally came to terms with his extraordinary gift. Looking at the maid who still stood there, Sherlock politely thanked her and asked her to step aside so he could change. She didn't notice the strange look in the maid's eyes. After all, when Thor had carried Sherlock out of the bathtub, he had simply wrapped him in a towel. And Thornage, clueless, hadn't paid any attention to the issue of revealing anything. He carelessly tossed Sherlock onto the bed, and it was Frigga who had the maids tuck him in. Fortunately, the maid was kind enough to think for a moment before deciding not to tell Sherlock about this. After all, sometimes knowing too much isn't a good thing. With a slight nod, the maid retreated through the door, closing it behind her. Sherlock pulled a set of tracksuits from his suitcase and put them on before opening the door and asking where Thor was. After learning that Thor was probably drinking with his friends in the cafeteria, Sherlock leisurely made his way there. However, as he walked, he gradually noticed something was amiss. Everyone was looking at him strangely, and some even pulled their companions aside to whisper. Even the most clueless Sherlock knew there was something going on. Either the maid didn't know or she hadn't told him. Filled with rage, Sherlock quickly entered the palace cafeteria, flung open the door, and roared, "Thor! What the hell did you do to me, you bastard?" The cafeteria was bustling with activity, led by Thor. With every Asgardian warrior drunk, the atmosphere inside resembled a party on Earth. Sherlock's roar brought a sudden silence to the entire party. Thor, the main eventer, saw Sherlock's vibrant energy and his eyes lit up as he rushed over, glass in hand. "What are you talking about, my friend? What will I do to you? Instead of questioning what I'll do to you, why don't you tell me exactly what you did in that library to deserve that? You're the first person in Asgard's history to emerge feeling nearly dead." Hearing Thor's words and looking at the curious faces of the people around him, Sherlock froze for a moment, his rage extinguished by Thor's interruption. Scratching his head awkwardly, Sherlock reflected carefully before speaking. "What can I do? I just memorized the basic magic patterns of Asgard, and the books on illusion magic and sequence magic. What else can I do?" "But you, Thor, what exactly did you do? Why did everyone look at me so strangely on the way here?" Sherlock didn't notice that after he finished explaining what he had done in the past 16 days, the entire venue was looking at him like a monster. Even Thor looked at him with a look of "what the hell? How can they look at him like that?" He completely ignored Sherlock's subsequent questions and grabbed Sherlock's shoulders and shook him vigorously. "You mean, in these 15 days, you memorized the basic magic patterns of Asgard? And learned illusion magic and sequence magic?" Sherlock, slightly annoyed by the interruption, looked at Thor with confusion. To be exact, it took 5 days, 5 days on the fundamentals, 6 days on illusions, and 5 days on sequencing. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" As Sherlock finished speaking, the entire venue was filled with a pin drop. After a long moment, everyone lost interest in the commotion and left, one after another. Even Thor looked at Sherlock with a serious expression, leaving him bewildered, unable to understand what had happened. "What's going on, Thor? Why did they all leave after hearing what I said?" Thor's expression was complicated as he listened to Sherlock's question. He patted Sherlock on the shoulder before speaking. "Well, let's put it this way. Everyone you see here learned the fundamentals, including me. But even the fastest among us took nearly 3 years to master them. I'm going to the practice field with them, too. You're being too discouraging." Chapter 60 The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 3. Sherlock had unintentionally acted in a Versailles manner, but he felt no remorse for his actions. While he didn't know what these idiots had done to him, Sherlock took it as revenge. Of course, Sherlock had also gone to the training grounds with Thor. After all, Sherlock had merely memorized the textbook, but magic still required practical application to learn. Even so, in just 3 days, under the watchful eyes of Thor and the others, Sherlock had mastered the Asgardian illusion and sequence magic. His speed had the melee fighter's eyes nearly dropping to the floor. During those 3 days, Sherlock had become quite familiar with these reckless men. Sherlock had also come to understand one thing: these reckless men, led by Thor, were complete idiots at magic, downright idiots. This explained why it took them 3 years to learn the basics. Of course, as Sherlock's proficiency in magic grew, he also realized something that blew his mind. The sequence magic he'd learned was actually the most primitive version. No one in Asgard used such primitive sequence magic anymore. The archer's sequence magic had already advanced to thousands of levels. This made Sherlock beat his chest in frustration. He'd missed out on studying history and humanities. After all this time, he'd only learned the weakest, most primitive version. Fortunately, Sherlock had a relatively positive attitude and quickly adjusted his mindset. After all, the primitive version held infinite possibilities for Sherlock. It was like the Type 59. No matter how it was modified, even if it was turned into a Star Destroyer, its essence, its core, was still the Type 59. Sherlock treated it as if he had received the core of the prototype. If the Asgardians could develop sequence magic to thousands of levels, Sherlock believed he could do the same, perhaps even better. After all, Sherlock came from a country that had modified a World War II-era bomber so much that 26 letters wouldn't be enough, so Sherlock wasn't entirely confident. Seeing Sherlock's gradual mastery of magic, Thor, a warrior, naturally stepped forward, prodded by the others, and offered to practice with Sherlock. After all, Sherlock's magical talent filled them with envy and resentment, especially over the past 3 days, having watched Sherlock's transformation from a complete beginner to a fluent spellcaster. Sherlock naturally didn't refuse Thor's challenge, even glaring at the group of people following him with malicious intent. If Sherlock didn't know how to stop time, he might already have a complete set of Meowth-Hammer-inspired Asgardian warrior masks of pain in his library. Thor's challenge also taught him 2 things: the importance of leaving Sherlock alone and the fact that times have changed for adults. The moment the call to action was given, Sherlock unleashed a wave of Nerd-like clones. Under the spell of the illusion, the entire arena was filled with Sherlock, forcibly surrounding the reckless Thor. Thor, deeply familiar with illusion magic, trained by Loki, was naturally unfazed by the scene. He knew that even though there appeared to be many people, there was only one real person. Beyond the real person, everything else was merely illusions. But the next moment, Sherlock made him realize clearly what it meant to be a grown-up. Sherlock whipped around and whipped out a massive Gatling gun. Before Thor could react, Sherlock swiftly unleashed his explosive warlock form, creating a curtain of magic patterns in front of Sherlock. Just as Thor, sensing something was wrong, was about to throw his hammer at Sherlock, Sherlock grinned and pulled the trigger. Under the spell, the Gatling gun's bullets instantly transformed into grenades. The roar of the explosion and the resulting smoke quickly engulfed Thor. Combined with the effects of the illusion magic, the Asgardian warriors experienced for the first time the power of a pinprick of fire. Almost every Asgardian warrior gritted their teeth at the sight, their eyes twitching as they gazed at the cloud of smoke at the center of the concentrated fire. Fortunately, Sherlock had managed to hold back a bit. The explosive spell wasn't fully activated, and the Gatling gun's bullets weren't full strength, just ordinary .22mm rounds. They couldn't penetrate Thor's armor, but they certainly hurt. With a grim smile, Sherlock fired a full 1,000 rounds before contentedly putting the Gatling gun back into his library and dispelling his illusion magic. The entire practice field was a pin drop, and everyone in the stand seemed to be hoping that Thor, mired in the smoke, was still alive and able to launch a counterattack. At least, he wouldn't lose so badly. As if receiving everyone's wishes, Meowhammer flew out from the cloud of dust at an extremely fast speed. The wind pressure from the hammer even blew away the cloud of dust, revealing the bruised Thor inside. Seeing Meowhammer flying towards him, despite its extremely fast speed, Sherlock was very agile and dodged it by crouching with his head covered. Seeing Meowhammer fly past his scalp, Sherlock stood up triumphantly and smiled at the bruised Thor, as if to ask, "What other tricks do you have?" After seeing Sherlock seem to relax, Thor was ecstatic and stretched out his hand to recall Meowhammer, hoping that Meowhammer would take advantage of Sherlock's inattention and stab him from behind. As a longtime Marvel fan, Sherlock couldn't help but realize the Meowhammer's properties. Everything was a show for Thor. As Thor made the move to summon the Meowhammer, Sherlock used his extended senses and, the instant he sensed the Meowhammer flying towards his back, he shifted sideways. He also cast a piercing spell at the exact moment the piercing spell appeared. The moment the piercing spell appeared, the faces of both Thor and the audience changed dramatically. Thor, in particular, saw his expression gradually shift from elation to terror. He frantically attempted to cancel the summoning of the Meowth hammer. Unfortunately, Thor was too slow to react. The Meowth hammer, after passing through Sherlock's spell, gained immense acceleration, transforming into a gray line and slamming fiercely into Thor's face. The Meowth hammer pierced Thor's face, and under the immense force of the spell, Thor was sent flying a long way before collapsing to the ground. Sherlock's face finally lit up with smugness, and he gave Thor a disdainful gesture at his unusual arrogance. HMPH, a poor student trying to trick me? No way. Without even a glance back, he left the practice field. Meanwhile, the people in the stands rushed onto the field, ready to help Thor, who had been knocked unconscious by their hammer. But once they reached the field, they were in a state of confusion. Seeing the Meow hammer firmly embedded in Thor's face, they all began to wonder how they could get him to the infirmary. Chapter 61 The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 4. A heated debate ensued over how to get Thor to the infirmary. Finally, a drunkard, who preferred to drink beer as if it were water during training, stepped forward. After 2 full buckets of beer, Thor, knocked unconscious by his own hammer, finally regained consciousness. After all, if Thor didn't regain consciousness, someone would have to call Odin, as only Thor and Odin could lift the Meow hammer. Seeing Thor regain consciousness, everyone began to help him pull the hammer out of his face. Some lifted his wrist, some lifted his arm, and some helped him hold the hammer firmly. With all their efforts, the Meow hammer finally left its owner's face, and everyone saw the horrific side of Thor's face beneath it. They tossed the Meow hammer onto the training grounds, where no one could take it, so they weren't worried about losing it. They found 2 spears and armor to make a makeshift stretcher, and tossed the now-dead Thor onto it. Everyone then scrambled frantically towards the infirmary. The training ground, initially bustling with activity, went completely deserted in less than half an hour. Meowth hammer was left alone in the empty space. It was truly a tragic hammer. Thor was rushed to the hospital, while Sherlock, meanwhile, was also struggling. He forced himself back to his room. The moment the door closed, Sherlock's smug smile vanished in an instant. His face paled, sweat streaked across his forehead, and he felt like a noodle. Suddenly, Sherlock felt his knees buckle, and he fell to his knees. Then, as if all his strength had been drained away, his upper body slumped to the ground, boneless. The result was Sherlock lying on the floor of his room in a strangely awkward position, his butt sticking out. Honestly, if Sherlock hadn't been so pale, his back soaked with sweat, others might have thought he had some obscure hobby. The reason for Sherlock's behavior was simple: he'd been showing off too much, his mana bar was running low, and for someone who loves fun to try to imitate Long Ocean was pure silliness. Sherlock knew one thing the moment he arrived in Asgard and met Thor: once he knew he was a mage, he'd definitely be tempted to practice with him. Therefore, when Sherlock saw the sequence magic in the library, besides secretly thinking of Odin as a being full of mischief, he was also filled with delight. Upon seeing this magic, Sherlock's mind formed a complete strategy based on his firearms. After all, he wasn't technically a member of Camartage. After deciding to give Thor and his group of Asgardians a little shock from Earth's muggles, Sherlock began to work tirelessly, squeezing his rest time with potions day and night, memorizing both sets of spells. However, during those 3 days of experimentation, Sherlock learned the truth about ideals being high, but reality being harsh. The magic power consumed by the sequence of spells was surprisingly proportional to its power. Furthermore, it was also proportional to the mass of the object launched. In other words, for a single shot, the greater the power, the more magic power consumed; the greater the number of shots, the more magic power consumed; and the heavier the object, the more magic power consumed. With sufficient magic power, transforming a 7.62mm bullet fired from an AK-47 into an armor-piercing or high-explosive round for a tank would be a breeze. Even with a simple optimization of the sequence, transforming a bullet into a nuclear bomb wasn't impossible. After discovering this characteristic, Sherlock began to formulate a strategy against Thor, which he even gave the appealing name Saturation Fire. For 3 days, he trained during the day and spent his nights in the guest room, refining his chosen Gatling gun. After all, Sherlock couldn't sustain the original caliber of the Gatling gun for long, and he didn't want Thor to be crippled by his merciful Gatling gun. That's how the .22 caliber bird-shooting Gatling gun came into being. During the battle, Sherlock conjured so many shadow clones not only to confuse Thor and prevent him from finding his true form, but also to enhance the visual effect and deter the other fighters from harassing him after the battle. Everything went according to Sherlock's plan, except for the final moment when he accelerated Thor's meow hammer. There, Sherlock used a penetration technique, a crude example of which is to transform a 7.62mm AK-47 bullet into the power of a 12.7mm anti-material sniper rifle through magical power. This was the limit of Sherlock's current capabilities. But Sherlock had clearly overlooked one thing, the meow meow hammer's properties. After all, it's theoretically the core of a planet, so its weight is undeniable. Consequently, Sherlock's mana bar had already been depleted by more than half due to the Gatling gun's barrage. While accelerating the meow meow hammer, Sherlock performed a mana-destroying mana trick. Sherlock couldn't even maintain the spell, and the magic knight attached to the meow meow hammer only managed a fraction of its intended effect. Fortunately, even this small amount of magic was enough for Thor to miscalculate the meow meow hammer's impact point, causing it to slip out of his grasp and strike him in the face, ending the fight. Seeing Thor collapse, Sherlock barely managed to complete his final act of prudence, acting like a normal person until he finally collapsed to the ground after returning to his room. After sprawling on the ground for a while, Sherlock finally felt his strength slowly return, and like a boneless maggot, he began to wriggle slowly across the ground. With much difficulty, he finally managed to correct his extremely embarrassing position and lie flat on the floor. Fortunately, the guest room was covered with soft carpet, so Sherlock wouldn't catch a cold. "I won't pretend like that again next time," Sherlock sighed briefly before drifting off to deep sleep. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62, The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 5. Sherlock slept all day, and it wasn't until the next morning that he felt he'd barely recovered. It was already noon when Sherlock saw Thor again. Thor, with a black eye, was sweating profusely on the training grounds. Because of Sherlock's slight shock, Thor even used his connections to find a number of skilled archers to increase the difficulty of the actual combat. Everything was going well. Thor was also deeply impressed by Sherlock's Muggle weaponry from Earth. No, it should be said that the entire Asgardian warriors were stunned by Sherlock's explosive power. When Sherlock arrived at the training grounds, he saw that no one was slacking off, everyone was sweating profusely while training with Thor. The only problem was that Thor's black eye was too distracting. Sherlock couldn't help but laugh. For some reason, Thor had become very sensitive to laughter these days, and it locked onto the source of laughter almost the moment Sherlock laughed. However, upon seeing Sherlock laughing, Thor could only end the fight, scratching his head awkwardly as he approached. He reached Sherlock, watching his laughter grow increasingly unbridled. Thor finally said in a sullen tone, "Stop laughing, asshole. This is all your fault." Hearing Thor's complaint, Sherlock internally congratulated himself for successfully pretending to be cool and not collapse before the crowd, but outwardly, he tried to suppress his laughter. But with this inner conflict, Sherlock couldn't hold back his laughter. Finally, his defenses broke, and he burst out laughing, clutching his stomach. Thor's fist stiffened as he watched, and he began to weigh the meow hammer in his hand, seemingly plotting how to strike the annoying creature in front of him. Fortunately, Sherlock had some sense. After a long laugh, he slowly stopped, patting Thor on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, you're not the one who's going to hit me, okay, I'll stop laughing. Don't look at me like that. I just don't understand. Asgard's medical technology is so advanced, why don't you just get it healed before you come out?" Sherlock said, simulating the extent of Thor's black eye with his hand on his own face. It would have been fine if Sherlock hadn't said anything, but once he did, Thor's forehead was covered with black lines, and he looked at Sherlock angrily before saying, "Do you think I don't want to? It's not that it can't be cured, it's that there's no way to treat it. Asgard's medical technology is excellent, that's true. As long as you're still breathing, the doctors won't let you die, but who would bother to research how to quickly heal a bruise?" Sherlock was stunned by Thor's complaint, then realized it was true. Just like no hospital on Earth would research how to make a bruise disappear immediately or how to quickly heal a wound less than a centimeter in size. But Sherlock wouldn't miss such a good opportunity to mock Thor. Just because hospitals don't study such things doesn't mean that ordinary people don't. He pulled 2 objects from his library and tossed them to Thor. Thor stared at Sherlock, bewildered, at the bottle and egg he'd tossed him. He looked at Sherlock with a puzzled expression. "What the hell is that? Why'd you throw me an egg?" Upon hearing Thor's question, Sherlock snapped. "Just roll the egg around when it's okay. Then, apply a warm compress to it at night and then apply the potion in your hand. It'll heal faster." After hearing Sherlock's words, Thor finally understood the purpose of the object in his hand. He immediately placed the egg on the dark spot around his eye and began to slowly roll it around. While rolling the egg, he held the bottle in his other hand and began to examine it. "Sherlock, I never knew you were a pharmacist and had a potion like this." Sherlock almost couldn't contain his flattery. After suppressing his smile, he continued. "You're overthinking it. This thing wasn't made by me. It was developed by a great nation in the east of Earth for treating injuries. Remember to apply a warm compress before bed, and be careful not to get it in your eyes." Despite Sherlock's earnest instructions, Thor clearly wasn't listening. He repeatedly glanced at the bottle of red liquid before casually stuffing it into his clothes. Sherlock didn't take Thor's disregard for his medical advice too seriously. After all, if Thor didn't listen, the safflower oil potion would surely teach him a lesson. After putting the potion away, Thor finally realized what was happening and looked at Sherlock with confusion. "By the way, Sherlock, what did you come to see me about?" Thor had the impression that Sherlock had mastered both types of Asgardian magic perfectly and no longer needed to come to the training grounds for practice. Moreover, Sherlock was a mage. Unlike his warriors, who needed a superior physique, mages ultimately relied on magic. His brother, Loki, had never bothered to come to the training grounds. After hearing Thor's question, Sherlock finally showed a hint of embarrassment. After all, he had beaten him up a few days ago, and now he felt a bit embarrassed to ask Thor for help. But there was nothing he could do. He was unfamiliar with the place. Sherlock had been here for almost a month and hadn't even set foot outside the castle. Sherlock hadn't forgotten his promise to buy gifts for Lorna. And if Lorna had already bought them, how could his uncles not also buy some? And how could Tony's side not also buy some? So Sherlock had a heavy workload on his shoulders. Unfortunately, Sherlock didn't have the Asgardian currency, so he couldn't use money in the castle. So, he had no choice but to seek out Thor, a local. Thor, understanding the situation, flashed his gaze and patted Sherlock on the shoulder. He said, "Leave it to me." He'd take Sherlock shopping early tomorrow morning, and Thor would cover all expenses. As Thor's friend, even the most clueless Sherlock knew something was amiss. After taking a deep breath, Sherlock turned to Thor and said, "Tell me, what are your conditions?" Thor was stunned by Sherlock's blunt revelation. Then, his face, which bore a striking resemblance to Su Jinjiang's, felt as if it were a monkey's bottom, and he watched Sherlock's continued hesitation. Fortunately, under Sherlock's relentless questioning, Thor finally stated his request. He wanted Sherlock to bring a letter to Jane on his return trip, expressing his longing for her. Sherlock, having eaten a mouthful of dog food, looked Spartan. He wished he hadn't asked. He glared at Thor, who reeked of love, with a sullen look. Sherlock casually pulled out a pair of sunglasses from his library, tossed them to Thor as a deposit, and walked away. Chapter 63 The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 6. That night, a scream echoed throughout the Asgardian palace. Sherlock, lying in bed, poring over his magic book, naturally heard the agonizing howl. It was Thor, of course, who hadn't listened carefully. After all, getting safflower oil in one's eyes wasn't a pleasant feeling. Don't ask how Sherlock knew that. Sherlock had experienced the same pain Thor felt during his training with his uncles. He felt as if his research was on fire, even briefly wondering if he'd overused his Mangekyo Sharingan. Of course, the Mangekyo was just Sherlock's childish fantasy, but the feeling was truly unbearable. After hearing Thor's heartbreaking howl, Sherlock contentedly closed his magic book and snuggled into his blanket with uncomfortably soft warmth. The blanket was extra soft and warm tonight. The next morning, Sherlock was pulled from his warm, soft bed by Thor. Before Sherlock could even begin to get grumpy, Thor's miserable appearance caught his eye. Thor's black eye had mostly healed, But due to the safflower oil that had accidentally gotten into his eye, one of his eyes was swollen like a sad frog. The moment he saw Thor's plight, Sherlock's grumpiness vanished, and he burst into laughter in bed. Thor could only stare at Sherlock sullenly, then put on the sunglasses Sherlock had given him, obscuring his sad frog-like eyes. Seeing his fun was over, Sherlock, at Thor's urging, took a long time to finally get up, wash, and change, then, led by Thor, to the cafeteria for breakfast. It wasn't until they finished breakfast and arrived at the palace gates that Sherlock truly understood Thor's status as the Prince of Asgard. The magnificent carriage at the gates betrayed Thor's status. To Sherlock, it was even more luxurious than the one that had brought Ancient One and himself to the palace. Thor dove into the carriage in a flash, beckoning Sherlock to hurry aboard, as the commercial district was far from the palace and would take quite a while to reach. Sherlock readily obliged. The carriage raced through Asgard for a while before arriving near a busy neighborhood. Thor hopped out with Sherlock in tow, telling the driver to wait for them. The street looked like a pedestrian mall, lined with vendors hawking their wares on either side. After giving his instructions to the driver, Thor and Sherlock rushed into the streets to shop. After all, this was the place he had lived in since childhood. Despite Thor's status as a prince of Asgard, he lacked the arrogance and extravagance of some princes. Instead, he was remarkably down-to-earth. He constantly explained the goods sold in the shops on both sides to Sherlock. With his wealthy friend helping him pay, Sherlock naturally didn't hesitate and happily began shopping, buying a wealth of exquisite Asgardian accessories. Then, he bought a set of Asgardian soft armor for his uncles. It was incredibly impressive. It looked like little more than a vest, but according to Thor, it could actually protect against .22 caliber bullets at a distance of 10 meters. Almost every Asgardian warrior possessed such soft armor, worn under their actual armor, offering both comfort and enhanced protection. Sherlock took one look and thought, what a great deal. He ordered 2 pieces each for his uncles and Tony. The only thing that both of them found difficult was the Asgardian skincare products Sherlock wanted to give to his future aunt, Pepper Potts. The 2 straight men were completely baffled by this stuff. Listening to the salesman's explanation, not only Sherlock, but even Thor, a local, looked completely bewildered. Finally, Thor waved his hand and, pretending to know everything, told Sherlock to just mix it and apply it. Sherlock rolled his eyes at Thor's comment. "You can mix this stuff and apply it," he said. "Are you really not afraid of getting poisoned?" But Sherlock appreciated Thor's actions, he just loved his extravagant behavior. After packing the items, Sherlock handed Thor the drinks he had prepared long ago. Thor's eyes lit up at the sight of the drinks, especially when he pulled out the 2 bottles of 75 proof and 90 proof alcohol. Thor couldn't take his eyes off them. As a reward for Thor's money, Sherlock repeatedly explained that this thing was used for disinfection, but it was obvious that Thor didn't listen at all. He even complained a little about why Sherlock didn't take out such a strong liquor when he was on Earth. Seeing that his explanation was ineffective, Sherlock stopped worrying about it. After all, Sherlock had confirmed that this thing was edible ethanol. Even if Thor really wanted to drink it, it wouldn't be a big problem. The 2 of them got what they wanted from this trip. With nothing else to do, Thor took Sherlock to wander around Asgard, wanting his good friend to experience the local customs and culture. But as they were walking around, Sherlock and Thor felt something was wrong. The problem started when Sherlock and Thor saw a mother scolding her son on the road. A young mother was seen carrying her son out of a roadside bookstore. The little boy, looking aggrieved, was clutching a stack of books that looked no different from the pile he'd packed with 5 years of college entrance exams and 3 years of mock exams. The young mother was walking in front, lecturing her child. "Son, you must study hard, little boy. You know, Prince Thor's friend mastered the basics of magic, along with some other magic techniques, in just 4 or 5 days, and defeated Prince Thor in 3. You must learn from him, study hard. I don't expect you to be as smart as him, but if you can be like him, I'll be satisfied." The little boy felt deeply aggrieved by his mother's incessant lectures, mumbling softly, "I heard that Prince Thor's friend had 3 heads and 8 arms, which allowed him to learn all that stuff in such a short time. And even defeating Prince Thor required using a strange weapon." The mother, facing the child's objection, smacked him on the head and pointed at the book he was clutching, angrily declaring, "Who cares if he has a few heads or 8 arms? He's learned it. You brat, go home and do 10 pages today. Or I won't let you have dinner." As the mother and son walked away, Sherlock and Thor stood there, both visibly embarrassed. Thor was embarrassed that it seemed like the whole of Asgard knew he'd lost a battle. As for Sherlock, he wasn't too bothered, but the guy who'd spread the rumor about having 3 heads and 8 arms was terrified. Does he dare to step forward and see if my transfiguration can satisfy your peculiar XP needs? Otherwise, it would not be impossible to let this guy who spread the gossip feel the same kind of merciful explosive Gatling gun as Thor's 22. Chapter 64, The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 7. After hearing the mother and son's gossip about them, both Sherlock and Thor instantly lost interest in continuing their stroll. Rumors are truly fascinating, especially when they're about you. When you're unaware, you don't pay attention to anything unusual around you. But once you know the rumor's contents, even strangers looking at you will feel uneasy. Even the slightest whisper will make you suspect they're spreading rumors about you. These rumors themselves didn't affect Sherlock or Thor much. For Thor, losing a practice match was perfectly normal for a warrior. All he had to do was practice hard and avoid defeat in a real battle. As for Sherlock, he wasn't planning on staying in Asgard permanently anyway, so he didn't care about the number of heads or arms. Aside from a few scornful comments about the rumor-monger's outlandish ideas, he didn't have any other emotions. However, neither Thor nor Sherlock had Tony's social inclinations, at least not yet, and neither of them wanted to remain in this bustling shopping street, the center of attention. Without hesitation, the two men hailed the carriage they had come in, and without stopping, they returned directly to the palace. Sherlock had originally thought that his affairs in Asgard were over. All that remained was to continue practicing his magic, striving to develop his own special technique before leaving. All that remained was to remain obediently within the palace, waking up on time, eating on time, studying on time, and waiting for the Ancient One to pick him up. But as expected, something unexpected happened. Sherlock had never dreamed he would find himself in Asgard, and even in the palace, working his way up. The whole thing had started with a decisive battle between Sherlock and Thor, witnessed by nearly all of Asgard's warriors, including, naturally, a renowned warrior. The only difference was that unlike Thor and his companions, those reckless warriors rose to fame through bravery, while this one was a coward. Sherlock had actually gotten to know this eccentric thoroughly. His initial target was an archer, but he had no talent for the bow, and his targets were all new. Besides missing the target, he could hit anything: flying insects, passers-by, small animals in the grass, and even, but not limited to, instructors, superiors, and teammates. Although he had learned sequence magic, his accuracy was woefully lacking, and he was eliminated from the archer group. This eccentric father, unable to bear seeing his son drown his sorrows in alcohol, helped him get a job transferred to warrior. His father's vision was truly remarkable. This eccentric's talent for the warrior class was unparalleled. He could essentially learn any technique he saw, and with minimal practice, he mastered it. In fact, among the warriors in the training ground, this eccentric could single-handedly challenge anyone except Thor, and even Thor only managed to defeat him with his Meow hammer. But even with such immense talent, his mental fortitude was poor. On his first battlefield, seeing the ferocious-looking enemy charging towards him, wielding a massive weapon, he flinched. He later gained a reputation for being unstoppable in training, yet in actual combat, he was still known as a wimp. He offered a compelling excuse: he loved being an archer, as archers didn't need to engage the enemy at close range. While everyone laughed at his timid nature, they also admired his talent, using him as a sparring partner in practice and not rejecting him like other archers. However, Sherlock's arrival opened this unique perspective to a new path. Firearms effectively addressed his fear of facing the enemy head-on. By the time Sherlock faced Thor, he had already developed numerous firearms-related combat techniques. With this in mind, the man approached Sherlock shortly after he returned to his guest room in the palace and expressed his desire to purchase the firearms he possessed. Sherlock had never imagined he could make a good deal in Asgard, and his profiteer spirit instantly awakened. He chuckled and welcomed the eccentric warrior into his room, then pulled out a number of weapons and began to tease him about them, explaining that he would only accept barter and gold. Beleaguered by Sherlock's persuasive tactics, the man actually bought quite a few goodies from him. As for the payment method, gold was not a given, as Asgard was in no shortage of such items. To Sherlock's surprise, the man produced 5 dwarf-made daggers. While not at the same level as Thor's, they were still impressive enough. Because of this, Sherlock happily agreed to the deal, and the man ultimately walked away with a 5.56 caliber Gatling gun, 2 AK series rifles, 2 pistols, and a vast amount of ammunition. Sherlock thought his business was over, but he never expected this would be the beginning of his career as Asgard's sole arms dealer. The reason was simple. After receiving the weapons from Sherlock, the man demonstrated his skills in gunfighting and sequence magic at the training grounds the next day, promising to provide cover for the team in the future. Everyone was stunned to see Thor's friend's bizarre weapons for sale. He had to make some moves. Although he didn't know sequence magic, he stuffed this little gadget called a pistol into his pants, hoping to even use it to ambush his enemies on the battlefield. Because of this, Sherlock's weapon shop successfully opened within the Asgardian palace. Because he finally got his revenge, he even showed off to the archers team that he had been kicked out of. After all, compared to bows and arrows, the 3-point and one-line aiming of guns is much more convenient. Sherlock can even provide sights and calibration services. Chapter 65, The Life of the Salted Fish Wizard in Asgard, 8. With the constant promotion of this product, Sherlock's arms business in the Asgardian palace gradually became a full-fledged industrial chain. Thanks to Sherlock's initial love for firearms, his library boasted a large collection of firearms, and thanks to this, his business began to grow. To archers, Sherlock recommended World War II-era firearms. Bolt action was faster than bows and arrows, but not as rapid as automatic rifles, which depleted the mana bar. The bullets were also lighter than arrows, making them popular with archers. Sherlock even offered different prices based on the model of firearm. The M1, due to its rate of fire, was more expensive than the 98K. Modern, technologically advanced sniper rifles were significantly more expensive than the M1. Even among sniper rifles, semi-automatic models were slightly more expensive than bolt-action models. Of course, the most powerful anti-material sniper rifles were significantly more expensive than bolt-action models. As for the warriors, Sherlock brought out a wide variety of pistols, ranging from the .22 P22 to the .50 Desert Eagle, even custom-made versions like the Terran Tactical. These compact, portable, and effective weapons proved popular with the warriors, and many even learned the art of hand-to-hand combat thanks to the magical power of that rare flower. Of course, in addition to the warriors and archers, Asgard's magicians were also not to be left behind. Although they initially dismissed Sherlock's firearms, as time passed, they gradually became more interested in the increased combat effectiveness of their archers and warriors thanks to his weapons. They began to approach Sherlock with their needs for firearms. Faced with these warlocks, who feared being approached, Sherlock naturally offered no refusal. What could be more suitable for these magicians than a shotgun? Even if the marbles weren't powerful enough, there were still slugs. Add to that the explosives Sherlock possessed, like grenades, flashbangs, and smoke bombs, each of which captivated the mages. With Sherlock's help, things began to look a bit off in Asgard. Of course, this had nothing to do with Sherlock. Did it even Odin, the God King, say nothing when Sherlock openly sold arms in his palace? Sherlock was incredibly content with his life, as evidenced by the collection in his library. While not as extensive as Odin's, it was still quite rich, even including several Asgardian magic books. Aside from Sherlock's inexplicable occupation in Asgard, and the fact that his business was booming and he had little time to practice his magic, Sherlock's only remaining source of dissatisfaction was probably Thor. After a long day of tending to guests, finally ready for a restful nap at dusk, Thor would arrive unannounced and disturb Sherlock's rest. It would be agonizing for anyone. It was especially irritating when Thor, not for any other reason but to ask Sherlock to deliver a love letter to Jane, was even more infuriating. Sherlock was truly enlightened. In his 2 lifetimes, this was the first time he had ever seen such a muscular man standing before him, reciting a deeply emotional and cheesy love letter he had written, and even demanding his comments. He was reciting, but most importantly, he was clutching a bottle of alcohol Sherlock had given him, taking sips from it. Sherlock practically watched as the alcohol in Thor's hand rose from 75% to 90% and finally to 99%. The most outrageous thing was that this guy came every night, and each night's love letter was different. If it hadn't always started with "Dear Jane," Sherlock would have thought Thor was hinting at something. The most important thing was that Thor, a hammer-wielding brute, was incredibly skilled at writing love letters, so much so that Sherlock considered them almost pornographic. Sherlock was completely speechless. Sherlock didn't want to know the details of Thor and Jane's life, let alone Thor's comments. Sherlock had tried to escape, but ultimately, Sherlock lay in bed, holding his hammer to his chest, patiently listening to Thor's incredibly cheesy love letters. Finally, after a week of torment, Sherlock finally couldn't take it anymore. On the last day, he interrupted Thor's heartfelt recitation, snatched Thor's love letter from him, and polished it using a template he'd seen before his time travel. Although this polishing was barely more than writing a new one. At least Sherlock and Thor were both satisfied. At Thor's request, he added a few cheesy love lines. To prevent Thor from bothering him again, and to avoid the experience of lying in bed with a genuine Meowth hammer on his chest, listening to Su Jinjiang, a peerless hunk with the power of a horse, recite a deeply moving and emotionally charged love letter to him, a letter that was incredibly corny and detailed. He even asked for his own comments. Sherlock practically poured his entire 2 lifetimes worth of Chinese proficiency into this letter. Fortunately, the final result was quite satisfactory. Thor took Sherlock's handwritten letter and, blah, blah, the polished version, was astonished. He happily ran back to prepare the packaging. Sherlock finally had some peace of mind, no longer having to endure such erroneous interpretations. However, Sherlock's good times didn't last long. As promised, the Ancient One arrived at the palace in Asgard, ready to take Sherlock back to Earth. The good news was that the weapons in Sherlock's library had already been sold for various Asgardian armors and rune-emblazoned cold weapons. The bad news was that before Sherlock was about to leave, Thor, in full view of everyone, reluctantly pulled out a beautifully wrapped pink envelope and solemnly handed it to Sherlock. God knows how horrified Sherlock must have been at that moment. If he had a mirror, he'd have noticed his face had turned a riot of color. Chapter 66 Returning Home. Finally, Sherlock, his face almost green with rage, tucked Thor's letter into his arms and, under the strange gazes of the Ancient One, Odin, and Frigga, fled through the portal. Fortunately, the other side of the portal opened by the Ancient One was Kamartaj, and Sherlock didn't encounter anyone familiar. Otherwise, Sherlock would have remained there, dedicated to the Great Destroyer, and embarked on an endless avatar. Returning to Kamartaj, Sherlock casually drew a small portal and stole a plain brown envelope from the library managed by the king. He sneered and stuffed Thor's love letter into it. The Ancient One, emerging from the portal, naturally saw Sherlock's actions, and his quizzical expression finally returned to normal. It didn't seem like she'd imagined it. After sealing the brown envelope, Sherlock seemed to remember something, a sly smile plastered on his face. As the Ancient One closed the portal, Sherlock immediately retrieved his wand from his library. With a gentle tap on the brown paper envelope, the once ordinary brown paper envelope, wrought with permanent transformation, instantly transformed into a familiar courier envelope. The 3 letters M's were clearly visible on the pure white envelope, and even the sender's address and recipient were clearly written. After casually drawing a portal the size of his arm, Sherlock tossed the letter through it. This was because portals have a special feature: if someone needs to be found, simply mentally thinking of their appearance and name will automatically locate them. In Spider-Man, No Returns, the chubby Ned, who had never encountered magic, was able to find 2 Spider-Men who had traveled through time and space on the first try. This principle explains why Sherlock had no concerns about delivering the letter to the wrong person. Unbeknownst to Sherlock, Jane and the Doctor had already begun researching the Tesseract for SHIELD, and the letter Sherlock sent through the portal was discovered by Jane and Black Egg at the same time. Black-boiled Egg showed no interest in the exquisitely written pink love letter. He simply hurried away with the M's envelope, his face gloomy. Sherlock never imagined that, because of a simple prank, the head of Oxygen would face a 4-pronged trial: his immediate superior, the Space Agency, the Security Bureau, and Black-boiled Egg. This was simply to prove that his company truly lacked the capabilities for interstellar mail delivery, and that number 007 like courier could bypass SHIELD's layers of security and silently place the letter on the recipient's desk. The poor manager's head was practically riled up over this incident, his hairstyle resembling that of a Mediterranean hairdresser. Of course, that was all a story for later. For Sherlock, it was just a joke. Only the Ancient One's green light flickered faintly, and then he looked at Sherlock with a strange expression, as if he was trying hard to suppress something. Sherlock didn't understand what the Ancient One had done, assuming he was still puzzled by Thor handing him a love letter in public. After a hasty goodbye, He tore through a portal and vanished into Camartage. Sherlock didn't realize it, but after he left, the Ancient One's green light intensified, a smile he had never worn before graced his face. He closed his eyes and continued to manipulate the time stone, though for some reason, that smile looked more and more like amusement. Sherlock's portal opened right in his room. After over a month away, there wasn't a speck of dust in Sherlock's room, a sign that someone regularly cleaned it. Throwing himself onto his large bed, Sherlock couldn't help but sigh. My own doghouse is so much more comfortable. After lingering on his bed for a while, Sherlock took a quick shower, changed into clean clothes, and opened the window to breathe in the slightly polluted New York air, sighing at how good it was to be home. He slowly opened the door and began walking downstairs. Sherlock needed to share gifts with his uncles and the little girls, and he also planned to find Price to restock his library. After making his way downstairs, the first person Sherlock saw was Skye, still sitting at the cashier. Skye was surprised to see Sherlock coming downstairs, her eyes widening as she stared at him. "When did you get back?" Sherlock could only laugh off Skye's question and casually tossed her a woman's necklace he had brought back from Asgard. Skye was immediately captivated by the exquisiteness of Sherlock's gift, ignoring Sherlock and examining the necklace in her hand. Sherlock had given Skye a closable necklace that could hold 2 or 3 photos. Sherlock knew Skye was obsessed with her biological parents and was even searching for them. Sherlock explained that after finding her parents, Skye could place their photos and her own inside the necklace. The necklace was also incredibly durable, so there was no risk of damage. After Sherlock explained the necklace's purpose, Skye expressed her love for it and put it on, saying she'd take a picture of herself and put it inside during a break. After securing Skye's gift, Sherlock began to inquire about the others' whereabouts. It would have been fine if he hadn't asked, but upon inquiry, Skye's face immediately lit up with a meaningful smile, explaining that they were all at the training grounds out back, where Sherlock could see his uncles. Despite Skye's sly expression, as if she'd just caught wind of a colleague's romance, Sherlock understood that something was going on in the training grounds out back that he didn't know about. However, no matter how much Sherlock questioned, Skye remained silent, acting like she didn't know, and even if she did, she wouldn't tell him. She simply ignored any of Sherlock's questions. Helplessly, Sherlock could only sigh, take a deep breath, and then stride towards the physical training ground behind him. Anyway, whether he stuck his head out or hid his head, he would be stabbed. Sherlock wanted to see what kind of monster could make Skye show such an expression. Chapter 67 Achievement, Lolly Collector. Under Skye's strangely amused gaze, Sherlock, bewildered, headed for the training grounds. As soon as he reached the physical training area, Sherlock's entire demeanor shifted to a Spartan state. Amidst this whirling mud and water, a multitude of muscular men were engaged in training. However, the most eye-catching figures in the entire training ground weren't the muddy men. Instead, they were 2 young girls. One had green hair and was wielding a pink Hello Kitty printed rifle, firing continuously into the air while verbally abusing the men climbing the barbed wire in a prone position. It was Lorna, whom I hadn't seen in a while. But not far away, who was that young girl, much younger than Lorna, with a blonde bob haircut and a pink AK-50 with a Pink Panther logo? And this Lolita, who looked considerably smaller than Lorna, was far more ferocious. See? That pink AK wasn't just a magazine, but a giant pink drum. And that guy's curses were far more vulgar than Lorna's. Sherlock had the expression of an elderly man on the subway. He'd only been away for a month, and out of nowhere, there was this Lolita? Could Lolitas even divide? Standing at the edge of the field, Sherlock quickly caught the attention of Lorna and the blonde. Seeing Sherlock's Spartan expression fixed on his friend nearby, Lorna angrily pressed her intercom and said something. Moments later, Soap, on the other side of the training ground, ran over to Sherlock with a look of surprise and immediately embraced the bewildered Sherlock. "You're finally back, brat? If you hadn't come back, Price would have issued a worldwide wanted order to see where you've been." Sherlock simply rolled his eyes at Soap's words, almost subconsciously convinced that the extra girl had a connection to Soap. "Okay, I understand your concern, but first, could you please tell me where that extra girl came from?" Seeing Sherlock's expressionless face, Soap, with a guilty look on his face, explained that the girl's name was Mindy Macready, the daughter of his good friend from their days as a recruit. His friend had died in an accident, and after helping to avenge his father, Mindy was adopted by a police officer. However, because his friend had never sent Mindy to school, Teaching her military training, even including combat weapons, Mindy struggled to adapt. After learning about this, he immediately approached the family and offered to adopt Mindy. Seeing Soap's military background and the owner's connections to Tony Stark, the police officer agreed. Because of this, during Sherlock's absence, a violent young woman had inexplicably appeared in Sherlock's gun shop. Sherlock's mouth twitched as he listened to Soap's explanation, but only halfway through did he recognize the violent young woman, Hit Girl from Kick-Ass. Proud of Price's good start, his place, once a macho men's club, had inexplicably transformed into a gathering place for young women. Sherlock even suspected that if he had a system, a great achievement would pop up in his head right now. Ding! Congratulations to the host for achieving the achievement, Lolita Collector. Wearing this achievement will earn you the favor of Lolita, but there's a chance of triggering a negative buff, starting with 3 years and ending with a death penalty. Honestly, at this point, Sherlock was beginning to wonder if he had some strange system that attracted Lolita, when he clearly preferred beautiful older women. Sherlock was even considering contacting Deadpool and offering him money to steal Anne Hathaway's Catwoman from next door. After all, Anne's Catwoman was truly amazing. Just as Sherlock was lost in his thoughts, he was interrupted by Soap, who mistakenly assumed Sherlock was preoccupied with Mindy's fate and, rather sadly, played sympathy to Sherlock. Okay, Sherlock, if you don't like Mindy living here, I'll take her home. After all, she's my good brother's daughter, and I can't let her live on the streets. Seeing Soap's poor acting, Sherlock rolled his eyes at Soap before waving his hand, indicating that it didn't matter. The room was big enough, so it was just a matter of adding a few chopsticks. More importantly, Mindy would be a good companion for Lorna. Sherlock was genuinely worried that Lorna, a North Star, would be corrupted by these rough guys, even though hit girl Mindy had already been corrupted. Seeing Sherlock's agreement, Soap quietly gave Lorna and Mindy a thumbs up behind their backs, confirming that he had secured Sherlock's favor. Both Lorna and Mindy breathed a sigh of relief. Lorna actually liked this person, who was about her own age. At least she had a reliable ally when Sherlock teased her. For Mindy, compared to an ordinary family, ordinary school, and ordinary life, she undoubtedly preferred Sherlock's environment. The dazzling array of firearms and the unprecedented training methods captivated Mindy. After resolving Mindy's issue, Sherlock wasted no time and immediately called Soap, Mindy, and Lorna over to share their gifts. Of course, there were a few minor hiccups. Neither Mindy nor Lorna seemed interested in the exquisite jewelry Sherlock had brought back, but were intrigued by the armor and weapons he had brought. Sherlock absolutely refused to allow these two girls to become masculine, and he began to argue with them. As long as Lorna remained, Mindy would only play a supporting role due to her unfamiliarity. Ultimately, Sherlock relented, believing that neither Mindy nor Lorna would have a life as ordinary as theirs. Therefore, Sherlock gave each Mindy and Lorna a dagger of the highest quality he had brought from Asgard, along with 2 sets of women's armor. As for Soap, it was simple. The bulletproof vest he'd bought, along with several sets of armor and a few daggers, proved to be incredibly powerful. At a similar weight, Asgardian armor could even surpass the best bulletproof plates. Therefore, Sherlock's gift was a truly special gift to Soap. After securing the gifts for several people, Sherlock began to inquire about the whereabouts of the other uncles. It wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't asked, but Soap and the 2 Lolita girls flashed sky smile at Sherlock. Sherlock's hair stood on end. Could there be more Lolita girls waiting for him somewhere else? Sherlock even envisioned his gun shop becoming a Lolita kindergarten in the near future. Thankfully, Soap didn't let Sherlock's fantasies continue. He pointed to a nearby, enclosed tactical training facility that resembled a giant hangar and said, "Where are the others? You can go see where they are. You might even see your idol." Chapter 68 Captain. An idol? Sherlock was bewildered after hearing Soap's words. He even began to recall everyone he'd admired, from before to after his time travel. At one point, he even included teachers in romantic action movies, but he still couldn't figure out who his idol was. In Sherlock's wild thoughts, he somehow managed to recall every detail of his past, both before and after his time travel. Though it wasn't apparent, Sherlock had actually carved a manor out of his shoe. Seeing Sherlock seemingly lost in his thoughts, Soap, who had watched him grow up, found it quite amusing. After all, it was rare to see Sherlock like this. When they were together, Sherlock usually looked like a lost dreamer. Although he could see Sherlock's imagination spiraling further and further out, Soap made no effort to stop him. Instead, he looked at her with amusement and a look of mischief. Okay, stop dwelling on that nonsense and go check out where Price and the others are. You know, Price is probably old and misses you, Soap urged Sherlock, constantly pushing him out. Once they were outside the large training ground, Soap's slight push caused Sherlock to stumble. Just as he'd regained his balance, he heard the clang of a wire mesh door slam behind him. Sherlock turned back in confusion. He looked like he'd been kicked out. It wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't looked, but the sight of him made Sherlock uneasy. Behind the door, Soap wore a smirk. God knows how devastating a smirk from a tough, mohawk-wearing man could be. The moment Sherlock saw Soap's smile, he instinctively wanted to whip out his wand and give them an avida. Fortunately, Sherlock still retained a basic level of common sense, forcing his instinctive thoughts to stop. He glared at Soap, who stood on the other side of the wire gate with a smirk on his face. Well, no offense, my dear Uncle Soap, could you please tell me who's with Uncle Price and the others? And please stop laughing, you look too much like a cartoon villain. It would have been fine if Sherlock hadn't said anything, but the fact that he did sparked Soap's rebellious side. He rolled his eyes at Sherlock, his kindness taken for granted, and turned away from the gate. No matter how much Sherlock called out from the other side of the gate, Soap showed no interest in responding. He was furious. Humph! The cunt who couldn't be coaxed. Seeing his Uncle Soap no longer paying attention, Sherlock grew nervous. God only knew what kind of mood Sherlock was in as he walked the short distance from the physical training ground to the tactical training ground. Sherlock was mentally preparing himself until he placed his hand on the massive door to the training ground. After taking several deep breaths, Sherlock decided that as long as a young girl didn't burst out hugging his thighs and calling him Daddy the moment he opened the door, he could accept whatever was inside. Having prepared himself mentally, Sherlock took a deep breath, then, sinking his energy into his dantian, flung the massive door open. Inside, the same indoor CQB tactical training ground that Sherlock had left was still there. The only difference was that in the corner, the former waiting area had become a makeshift competition arena. Zia Okiang, Guz, and Ghost, all wearing heavy protective gear, were huddled together, excitedly gesturing and discussing tactics. Meanwhile, Price stood on a raised platform, his eyes fixed on the tactical training ground. A stopwatch in his hand, constantly saying, "Faster, faster," the sound of gunfire echoed throughout the training ground in a rhythmic rhythm. Sherlock's movement as he pushed open the training ground's door naturally caught everyone's attention. The first to react were Zia Okiang and the other two, who had gathered to discuss tactics. They sprinted towards Sherlock, not even bothering to remove their protective gear. Price, however, was too busy keeping an eye on the training grounds to turn around immediately. When Zia Okiang and the other two reached Sherlock's side, before they could say anything, Price, standing on the dais, spoke first. "Soap, if I remember correctly, I told you the client requested confidentiality for this training, little jerk? You're back." Price initially thought it was Soap who had opened the door, but when he turned around and saw Sherlock standing there, his tone suddenly changed, a hint of surprise in his voice. Sherlock should have taken the initiative to greet so many elders, but at that moment, Sherlock clearly had no intention of doing so, despite everyone's attention being focused on him. But Sherlock's gaze was clearly fixed on the man with massive paunch, fresh from a CQB tactical drill, who emerged from the exit, rifle in hand. "Looks like you. American bastard," Captain Steve, fresh from training, seemed to sense Sherlock's gaze. Wiping his sweat with a towel from his bag, he waved at Sherlock in a friendly greeting. Sherlock had never imagined that Soap was referring to Captain America as his idol, but on reflection, it made sense. The children of the Beacon Nation in Marvel Comics grew up hearing stories about Captain America. Sherlock was no exception, but that was before Sherlock's time travel. What did it have to do with him? It was so mysterious, Sherlock almost thought he was a father. Just as Sherlock waved blankly at Captain America in response, Price finally arrived, his familiar, smoky roar piercing Sherlock's ears once again. "Little bastard, where the hell have you been? I can't get through to you on the phone, and you won't reply to my emails. Damn it, if you don't come back, I'm going to issue a worldwide arrest warrant." Faced with Price's roar, Sherlock had no intention of responding. Instead, he quietly pulled Price aside and pointed at Captain America, who was resting, asking in a very subtle manner, "What's going on? Why is Captain America here with us?" Has SHIELD contacted you? Faced with Sherlock's 3 consecutive questions, Price rolled his eyes in annoyance, but did answer Sherlock's question. The captain has just woken up and needs systematic training to understand current tactics and strategies, as well as various weaponry. We're a top-tier force nationwide, so where else could they go but here? As for those people from SHIELD, don't worry. We don't come into contact with them often, but it's not entirely absent. After all, they occasionally send low-ranking recruits or those they don't trust to training camps like ours. As for contact, we've already had it, so you don't have to worry. And most importantly, SHIELD gives us so much. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Forgotten Things. After hearing Price's words, Sherlock's head was choked with questions, and he looked at Price beside him with the expression of an elderly subway rider. Sherlock couldn't believe it. Could such a thing be outsourced to a private company? After all, before crossing over, these things were handled solely by the state. Now, having traveled through time, Sherlock was a little unaccustomed to such a free atmosphere. Seeing Sherlock's disbelief, Price tapped Sherlock's head in annoyance and continued to explain in a low voice. I usually tell you to focus more on the business, but you just like to slack off. It's pissing me off. Listen up, little brat, it's not just SHIELD, Fubbo, they do this. Even the military occasionally outsources training missions to private companies. It's common sense, what the hell? This is possible? No wonder there were rumors in a previous life that the lighthouse country was a paradise for intelligence operatives. Sherlock finally saw it. With this kind of behavior, it's no wonder the once prosperous SHIELD has become the ultimate serpent's shield. What's the difference between this and being completely defenseless? Seeing Sherlock's expression, which had shocked my mother for a whole year, Price regretted for the nth time not cultivating Sherlock's awareness of these matters from a young age. This was the reason Sherlock was currently so naive about what lay beneath the surface. Just as Price was about to say something, the captain finally gathered himself together and approached the others. Looking at Sherlock, surrounded by them, he asked in a friendly manner, "Colonel Price, who is this?" Faced with the captain's question, Price temporarily swallowed his thoughts and began introducing the captain. "Sherlock Phoenix, the boss we've all grown up with, the actual owner of this place. Sherlock, I think you should know this, Captain America, Steve Rogers." Upon hearing Price's question, the captain was visibly stunned. He had never imagined that the owner of such a training base would be the seemingly small child in front of him. Despite his surprise, the captain extended his hand to Sherlock in a friendly manner. "Hello, I'm Steve." Seeing the captain, just as friendly as the online rumors had suggested, Sherlock felt no resentment. He could only say that he was worthy of being the one to wield the Meowth hammer. He reached out and firmly shook the captain's large palm before addressing him. "Sherlock, it's nice to meet you. The children of Lighthouse Country have always idolized you since they were little, dear Captain." Hearing Sherlock's teasing, the captain rubbed his nose awkwardly, but the smile on his face remained, as if he was slightly surprised that he had become a national idol after waking up from a nap. Their first meeting was not bad for Sherlock. At least it wasn't as impressive as Iron Man Tony's. Who knows what Tony was thinking at the time, an uncle taking his nephew out for a stroll in front of his aunt. After a brief greeting, they were interrupted excitedly by Xiaoqiang. Compared to Price and the others, Xiaoqiang, Gates, and Ghost had truly grown up listening to stories about the captain's deeds. The 3 men's enlistment could be arguably influenced by the captain, so Xiaoqiang and the other 2 were undoubtedly far more excited than Sherlock when facing the captain. For unknown reasons, Xiaoqiang frantically invited Sherlock to join their team, hoping to have a duel with the captain. With Sherlock's words, that would make it 4 people, and they could gang up on the captain. Listening to Xiaoqiang's words, Sherlock looked at the youngest uncle in his seat with a look of idiocy. Putting aside the captain's near-peak physical fitness, he wondered, what kind of mindset could allow a 37-degree angle to say such cold and idiotic words in front of someone? Resolutely rejecting Xiaoqiang's invitation, Sherlock thought to himself that a mage like him would be crazy to join them in ganging up on a warrior. He refused, But that didn't stop Sherlock from telling the captain to be ruthless with Zhao. Steve naturally agreed with a smile. After a few days of getting along, the captain understood that Zhao was just speaking without thinking and had no ill intentions. He was actually a nice guy, and they'd even had a drink together from time to time. The captain actually had a good impression of Price and the others. Spending time with them reminded him of his days with the Howling Commandos. Seeing the captain present, Sherlock couldn't just take out the Asgardian items and divide the spoils in front of him. So, he quietly said hello and told Price and the others to meet him that evening for something. Sherlock then decisively excused himself. He had no choice but to leave. Firstly, the captain seemed interested. Sherlock knew the captain had later worked for Black Egg alongside Black Widow for a long time, and for now, he didn't want to be associated with a troublemaker. Secondly, the reason Sherlock ran so quickly was because of that jerk Zhao. Seeing the eagerness in his eyes, Sherlock knew without hesitation that if he didn't leave, he would definitely cause trouble. Sherlock said hello, added the captain's contact information, and then made his way out without hesitation. Only after the tall door closed behind Sherlock did he breathe a sigh of relief. He began to curse Zhao, that jerk, for nearly getting beaten. Damn, since Sherlock had traveled through time, aside from the initial training, he hadn't been beaten. Even in Asgard, it was Sherlock who beat up Thor. Zhao, that jerk, had nearly let Sherlock break his record. How could he fight the captain? Even if the captain didn't use a shield, if he didn't use magic, he would be a useless fighter. Sherlock felt that his physical fitness was no match for a fighter like the captain. Cursing all the way, he made his way to the gun shop ahead. Just as he pushed open the door to the gun shop, Sherlock ran into Skye, who was hurriedly carrying a letter. The two almost bumped into each other. Fortunately, they both reacted quickly and stopped their actions in time, so no accident happened. Skye was visibly stunned upon seeing Sherlock. Then, she quickly slammed the letter in her hand at Sherlock and stormed off, leaving Sherlock bewildered. He didn't understand what had happened, it was just a near collision. Sherlock, unsure of what to do, picked up the letter Skye had slapped at him and began to read. It wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't read it, but the moment he did, a series of OSHXT, OFXXK, S escaped Sherlock's lips. The reason was simple, Sherlock had finally remembered what he'd forgotten before leaving for Asgard. His good uncle, Tony the Big Shit. Chapter 70 Tony is dying. Sherlock held the letter in his hand like a parent who forgot to pick up his child from school, and rushed out frantically. Skye was stunned by what he saw, and in the end, he could only shrug his shoulders and prepare to go and tell the group behind him that Sherlock had disappeared again. As for what the letter Sherlock saw was, it was actually very simple, an invitation letter plus 2 legal documents. The invitation letter didn't say much, except for an address that Sherlock was very familiar with, Tony's beachfront villa. What really broke Sherlock's defense were those 2 documents. One was Tony's inheritance notarization, and the other was an accident insurance policy. The beneficiaries were Pepper and Sherlock, and the insured was Tony. After seeing these 2 documents, Sherlock remembered that he seemed to have forgotten to leave enough antidote for his dearest uncle. Because of the suddenness of the incident, his first alien trip, and the temptation of the Golden Asgard. Like a frightened bull, Sherlock leaped into the parked Shelby Raptor. Though it had been parked for over a month, Sherlock's beloved car hadn't let him down, starting it up immediately. The moment he started, Sherlock unleashed the full power of the high-powered V8 pickup truck, doing a burnout and a U-turn. The 2-meter-wide, nearly 6-meter-long truck sped off like a sports car. Skye, who had just stepped out from behind, saw Sherlock's burnout start and immediately felt a sense of foreboding. However, before she could even sprint out, Sherlock's tailspin cut her off. Looking at the mud-soaked display window with a bitter face, Skye mentally cursed Sherlock, saying, "There's no such thing as a good boss." Sherlock was oblivious to Skye's rants. Sherlock had already floored the accelerator, sprinting frantically towards Tony's beachfront villa. Someone would undoubtedly ask why they didn't use magic like portals or portkeys to apparel it. It would surely be faster than driving. But come on, Tony now has Black Widow, a veteran agent sent by Black Egg, by his side. Besides, while Sherlock felt guilty, Tony wasn't dying in the IQ, so Sherlock wasn't really that anxious. The fact that he could still hold a party proved that Tony wasn't seriously ill, and even that the toxins in his system were still a little below the safety line. After a frantic drive, Sherlock finally arrived at Tony's villa. The good news was that the party was billed as Tony's birthday party, and it wasn't like Sherlock's first visit. The bad news was that by the time Sherlock arrived, Tony had already drunk a bit too much. He was now standing on the stage in his Iron Man armor, demonstrating how to urinate inside the suit. Sherlock's face was choked with anger as a dead memory suddenly attacked him. Sherlock took out a bottle of antidote and mixed it with a Muggle hangover remedy. He rushed onto the stage with a dark face and stuffed the bottle into Tony's mouth. Tony didn't see who rushed onto the stage, nor did he even see what the liquid was that was put into his mouth. He just drank it all in one gulp. Seeing that Tony seemed to have drunk the potion, Sherlock helped Tony off the stage with a dark face. Under the influence of alcohol and the upbeat songs, the crowd at the party soon forgot the protagonist of the party and started to party. After Sherlock helped Tony to a corner, maybe it was the effect of the hangover remedy or the antidote, Tony actually sobered up. Looking at Sherlock who was helping him, Tony had a lot of questions in his mind, but in the end, they all turned into a question. "Skank, where have you been for over a month?" Tony was curious about Sherlock's whereabouts, but Sherlock clearly wasn't paying any attention. He was completely absorbed in studying Tony's potion fit entry. Entry, drug resistance, locked, effect. Due to long-term use of a particular potion, the body has developed a resistance, rendering the potion 73% ineffective. To restore the full potion's effects, you must abstain from use for 3 full months. Because the entry is locked, there's no time limit for this potion. The timer for the potion's effects to resume begins after 24 hours. Seeing the entry above Tony's head, Sherlock was stunned. Honestly, this was the first time Sherlock had seen such a locked entry. "Did you mistake the antidote I gave you for water? Or what? I was only away for a month, and how much antidote did you drink?" Sherlock ignored Tony's questions about his whereabouts and instead, a look of shock on his face, questioned Tony. After hearing Sherlock's question, Tony's mind remained clear, perhaps because the antidote mistook the alcohol for a toxin. Despite losing 73% of its effectiveness, he was still very clear. Hearing Sherlock's question, Tony curled his lips, thought for a moment, and then answered. "About 1 bottle every 2 days. You know, you left me 10 bottles of antidote, and I later bought 5 more from those SHIELD guys." When Tony said this, Sherlock's eyes almost widened. "What? 1 bottle every 2 days? And you bought 5 more from SHIELD? Did you sell this stuff to them? You bought it back?" Faced with Sherlock's questioning, Tony rolled his eyes and retorted unhappily. "What can I do? You've disappeared, and I need to use my Iron Man suit. 1 bottle every 2 days is the minimum I need to keep myself healthy." Listening to Tony's discontented complaints, Sherlock slapped his forehead helplessly, then tentatively asked how much Tony had paid for the 5 bottles of antidote from Black Egg. After Tony revealed the price, Sherlock's eyes widened. Damn, Black Egg was definitely rigged from the outside to the inside. This price was even more rigged than when Tony sold it to them in the first place. What was this? The tycoon's money was returned in full, and Tony's money was split 20-80? After all this time, SHIELD had gotten 10 bottles of White Moss potion, 5 bottles of antidote, and 2 bottles of Polyjuice potion from Sherlock for free? The more Sherlock thought about it, the angrier he got. Seeing SHIELD making money was more painful than losing it, especially when it was Tony's money. Sherlock's gaze on Tony had transformed into one of dismay at a prodigal son. "Damn it, couldn't you just hold on a little longer?" Just as Sherlock was about to give Tony a good lecture, a man made his way through the throbbing crowd and approached the two of them. He looked at Sherlock and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, uncle and nephew. Sherlock, could you lend me your Uncle Tony for a moment? I need to discuss something with him." It was none other than Rhodes, Tony's only good friend and the future sarcasm monger of the Avengers. This wasn't Sherlock's first encounter with this amusing black man. Reminiscent of the events of Iron Man 2, Sherlock glared at Tony, who was still sprawled on the sofa. Then, he stood up, smiled at Rhodes, and walked away without hesitation. As for what the two were talking about, Sherlock honestly didn't care. He'd rather have Jarvis turn off the music, clear the area to give the two enough space for the fight, and then have Jarvis synthesize a lithium dioxide injection. If Sherlock remembered correctly, it was this: since magic wasn't working for the time being, he could use scientific methods to suppress the toxins in Tony's body. Chapter 71 War Machine, Iron Man. and detoxification. Just as Sherlock had imagined, he had barely cleared the revelers from the party when a silver-white, unpainted Iron Man clad in armor, carrying a red and gold Iron Man, burst onto the dance floor. Sherlock wasn't concerned about the friendly brawl between the two friends. Instead, he grabbed a drink and sat on the sofa, watching with considerable interest. If it weren't for the sheer lack of sunflower seeds available in America, Sherlock would have grabbed a handful and, while munching on them, watched the two Iron Mans clutch each other's shoulders, punching each other in the faceplates. The Iron Man's brawl had been turned into a turn-based battle. Sherlock even finished his drink as the two continued their round-based combat. Most importantly, they exchanged blows without a single scratch, leaving neither of them in any harm's way. Aside from a few scratches on their armor, nothing else was wrong. In the end, Sherlock couldn't stand the perfunctory approach. "Even a fight between elementary school kids is more interesting than you two," he said. Tony and Rhodes fighting was at best kindergarten, almost insulting to that level. Sherlock sat on the sofa and clapped his hands vigorously, attracting the attention of the two kids playing the friendly face-breaking punch game. Seeing them both stop and look at him, Sherlock threw his hands up and said, "Why don't you two take off your armor and fight? Otherwise, what are you doing throwing punches at each other?" Adding scratches to the armor, Sherlock's words embarrassed Rhodes. He had come to talk Tony down, but as Tony's friend, and since he had secretly donned the Iron Man suit himself, he already felt a tinge of guilt, so he didn't dare to use any force when he hit Tony. That's why he was playing a game of punch and punch with Tony. Otherwise, he was a soldier after all, albeit in the Air Force, but he could still be a decent fighter, right? It wasn't just Rhodes, even Tony felt awkward. Seeing his nephew impatiently watching the fight from the sofa, an empty cup in hand, Tony for some reason thought of the ancient Eastern art of monkey showmanship. Tony had lost all desire to play anymore and began to show off his acting prowess, ready to challenge Rhodes with his palm cannon. Watching Tony do a backflip with the aid of his armor, raising his arms and striking a pose, Sherlock rolled his eyes again. He shouldn't have given these two idiots any thought. They were acting like they were wearing state-of-the-art armor, engaging in a fight you wouldn't hear of in kindergarten. Losing interest, Sherlock casually tossed a glass in his hand, grabbed a pizza box that was still in good condition on the table, and headed downstairs to the garage. Sherlock even made sure to say hello to the two kindergarten seniors in armored suits before leaving. "Come back to me after you've decided the winner." He then headed for the garage, holding a pizza and eating as he walked. As he reached the garage door, Jarvis's voice rang in Sherlock's ears. "Mr. Sherlock, the lithium dioxide injection you requested is ready and on the garage table. According to my calculations, a 65% concentration should be enough to neutralize the toxins in Tony's system." Sherlock opened the garage door, casually setting the pizza box aside. He then walked over to the table, picked up the injection Jarvis had prepared, and examined it. With a satisfied nod, Sherlock casually put it away in his library, declaring he would give Tony the injection after the fight was over. After finding a chair and sitting down, Sherlock, seemingly in a playful mood, looked at the empty garage and asked, "Jarvis, does the authority Tony gave me allow you to carry out my orders?" After hearing Sherlock's question, Jarvis seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering. "Yes, sir. Your authority is the same as Pepper's, both at level 2, second only to Mr. Tony Stark. However, Mr. Sherlock, I have the right to refuse to carry out any orders that would cause redundancy in my system." Apparently impressed by Sherlock's idiotic questions during their initial meeting, Jarvis even added a supplementary clause after answering Sherlock's question. But Sherlock, for some reason, detected a deep irony in Jarvis's supplementary clause. Rolling his eyes at the empty garage, Sherlock muttered softly, "Am I that unreliable?" Jarvis could even feel his CPU temperature rising at Sherlock's rant. "Do you think you're talking human? I may not be human, but you're a real dog. Do you want me to help you recall what you've done to me?" Fortunately, Jarvis, the provincial party committee's artificial intelligence, maintained a clear advantage in rationality. Although his CPU temperature had risen several degrees due to his complaints, his immense computing power and common sense told him it was best to ignore Sherlock, the provincial party committee's comedic figure. Seeing his rants fall flat on his face, Sherlock felt bored and abandoned all hope of further amusement. He simply gave Jarvis an order. "Jarvis, I need you to perform a self-backup every week. Never forget this, no matter what. If possible, Ask Tony when he's free. Once you've obtained full authority, record this in your source code. Relieved that Sherlock hadn't said anything earth-shattering, Jarvis began to carry out Sherlock's orders. Okay, Mr. Sherlock, I've noted your request. I'll ask Tony about this later when he's free. Jarvis had barely finished speaking, and before Sherlock could even nod in satisfaction, the entire villa shook violently. After a while, the shaking in the villa finally stopped. Sherlock stood up from his chair and hurried upstairs. When he reached the living room, he saw Tony, dressed in his battle armor, with his hood armor cast aside, sitting on the floor. What's wrong? Did you lose the duel? I told you not to stand on the left, but you didn't listen. Tony rolled his eyes in annoyance at Sherlock's teasing. The toxins in his system were making him feel extremely uncomfortable, and he had no time to respond to Sherlock's teasing. Seeing that Tony seemed unconcerned, Sherlock no longer hesitated. With a flip of his right hand, the lithium dioxide that Jarvis had just synthesized appeared in Sherlock's hand, and he stabbed it directly into Tony's neck. Chapter 72 Black Braised Eggs and Black Widow. Oh fuck. Sherlock, you little bastard. What did you inject me with? Just as Charlotte finished the injection, Tony's powerful yell reached her ears, clutching her neck and cursing loudly. In response to Tony's question, Sherlock tossed the syringe in his hand and then, looking at Tony, who was sitting on the ground clutching his fists, said, "Lithium dioxide. It can effectively neutralize the toxins in your system. You're a genius. Magical potions aren't working anymore, so why don't you consider a scientific solution? Use your brain, my dear Uncle Tony." Tony's eyes lit up at Sherlock's words, and he immediately turned to Jarvis. "Jarvis, check my toxin levels." Jarvis' voice echoed from the villa the next second. "MR 17%, congratulations. Your toxins have been reduced to a safe level." Tony's eyes lit up at Jarvis' words, and he spoke eagerly. "Jarvis, make a lithium dioxide injection immediately. I think I'm going to need this forever." As Tony finished his words, Sherlock looked at him like he was an idiot. Rubbing his forehead with his hands, he turned to Tony, who had just gotten up from the ground. "I'm starting to doubt the authenticity of the PhD. You should know it's no good, right? If you use it too much, aren't you afraid of spiraling out of control?" Despite Sherlock's disdain, Tony didn't even think of refutation. Like a drowning man grasping at a straw, he looked at Sherlock excitedly. "No, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. As long as the lithium dioxide can get me through 3 months, I can resume using your potion to detoxify. And your potion will also help me counteract the toxicity of the lithium dioxide itself, so I'm not worried at all." Tony's words left Sherlock speechless. He'd found a bug. Looking at Sherlock standing there with a changing expression, Tony happily walked over and patted Sherlock on the shoulder, then picked up Sherlock by the back of his collar. Sherlock, who was still immersed in the fact that Tony had trapped him, was startled when his feet suddenly left the ground. Sherlock immediately started struggling in Tony's hands. "Put me down, you bastard. Where are you taking me? Put me down, damn it, I'm going to use magic." But it was obvious that Tony had no intention of putting Sherlock down, and Sherlock was no match for Tony in his iron armor, unless Sherlock really used magic. But it was obvious that Sherlock had no intention of using magic when facing his blood relative. He just struggled in Tony's hands like a maggot. Tony ignored Sherlock and quickly carried her to Sherlock's car at the villa's entrance. He unlocked the driver's seat and casually tossed Sherlock in. Tony then circled around and slid into the passenger seat, only to look at Sherlock, who had just struggled to sit. Ignoring Sherlock's murderous glare, Tony looked at Sherlock and said, "What are you still staring at? Drive. It's your dearest uncle's birthday. Treating me to donuts isn't too much to ask for, is it?" Taking a deep breath, Sherlock suppressed the urge to beat Tony up. After all, it was Tony's birthday, the old man. He'd bear it, bear it. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. He'd make him regret it tomorrow. Giving Tony a perfect fake smile as he sat in the passenger seat, clad in his armor, Sherlock started the car and drove towards a nearby donut shop. Perhaps it was the wrong timing, as the donut shop was nearly empty when the two arrived. Because of this, Tony's entrance in his Iron Man suit didn't cause much of a stir. After Tony posed for a few photos and autographed a few names, the two successfully obtained the donut shop owner's hidden menu, which was said to be the owner's oldest donut. Of course, Sherlock was skeptical, considering it looked like a custard covered in icing or chocolate. They found a table and began enjoying their donuts. Sherlock even grabbed a bottle of milk from the library to go with it, as soy milk was a bit much. Just as they were enjoying their meal, the door to the donut shop opened again. Unlike Tony, Sherlock, sitting across from him, immediately spotted who had walked in. Black and Egg. It's you, Nick, the eye-patch-wearing freaking hero, the peerless warrior in a leather jacket in the summer, the director of SHIELD, kept in the dark, being toyed around by Hydra, Fury. And the figure in a tight-fitting suit and red hair following behind Fury was, unsurprisingly, the legendary Black Widow. Sherlock's eyes lingered on Black Widow for a long moment before he struggled to move away. Damn, that figure is so impressive. Sherlock also felt that, compared to Scarlett Johansson, although Black Widow looked a lot like Scarlett, she was even prettier. Of course, her figure was even better. Those long, straight, slender legs alone were enough to instantly overpower Scarlett. Black Widow, following behind Black Egg, spotted Sherlock the moment she entered. As an agent close to Black Egg, Black Widow had naturally used the potion provided by Sherlock. Especially that thing called Polyjuice Potion. Besides its unforgettable flavor, it was practically made just for her. So, while lurking around Stark, Black Widow had actually paid close attention to Sherlock's profile, but unfortunately, Sherlock was busy in Asgard at the time, so the two never had the chance to meet. Naturally, Black Widow's attention was drawn to Sherlock during their first encounter, and she keenly noticed his efforts to look away from her. Sensing Sherlock's actions, Black Widow's smile widened even further, as if she had discovered something intriguing, her gaze never leaving Sherlock. Fortunately, Sherlock was unaware of the wicked thoughts in Black Widow's mind, otherwise, Sherlock would have definitely taught Black Widow a lesson about the punishment of a playboy. Women only slow down my one-draw speed. After gazing at Black Widow's sturdy figure for a while, Sherlock pondered how to get away from that unfortunate Black Brand Egg. As for a relationship with Black Widow? Sorry, Sherlock is not interested at all, unless it is Anne Hathaway, Anya Taylor, Kristen Stewart, Margot Robbie, Ana de Armas, or Gal Gadot. Sherlock said he would consider it. Chapter 73 The Dispute Begins, Part 1. To be honest, Black Widow was used to Sherlock staring at her with that lewd look. She even felt that she would have been more uncomfortable if no one had stared at her that day. However, the fact that Sherlock only stared for a moment before lowering his head to focus on his donut, coupled with Sherlock's age, gave Black Widow a slight misunderstanding, thinking Sherlock was some innocent boy. After all, this is the lighthouse country, where innocent boys are as common as pandas. This misunderstanding immediately gave Black Widow the urge to tease her younger brother, and the thought grew stronger in her mind. Of course, Black Widow wasn't the only one who noticed Sherlock's strange look. Tony, Sherlock's uncle, also noticed it. Just as Tony turned around with a puzzled look, wanting to see who could have caused Sherlock to give him that lewd look, he quickly recovered and was greeted by a needle. Fortunately, Tony's reaction was quick. Even without the aid of his helmet, Tony relied on his own reflexes, aided by his armor, to quickly grab the hand holding the syringe. "What is this? What are you doing? Who are you?" Seeing Tony suddenly grab her arm, Black Widow showed a rare look of surprise. Neither Black Widow nor Black Egg had expected such a sudden change. But seeing Tony's unusually cold, even murderous, eyes, Black Egg decided to explain. "Lithium dioxide can effectively neutralize the toxins formed by the palladium in your body. Let her go, Tony. Agent Romanoff means no harm." Hearing Black Egg's words, Tony's eyes softened. He casually took the syringe from Black Widow's hand and released her arm, but he continued to stare at her intently. "Agent Romanoff? I need an explanation." Seeing Tony's expression clearly uneasy, Black Widow remained calm. After rubbing her wrist, she introduced herself to Tony. "Natasha Romanoff, codenamed Black Widow, a SHIELD agent, assigned to protect you." Though Black Widow claimed protection, Tony didn't believe a word she said. Rather than protection, Tony preferred surveillance or a desire to extract something from him. Tony grew increasingly angry, rolling his eyes at the two people standing by the table and casually waving his hand at Black Widow. "I'm sorry to inform you, Agent Natasha Romanoff, you're fired." Black Widow shrugged her shoulders indifferently at Tony's announcement. Sherlock sat quietly in his seat until the first round of the three-way exchange was over, happily devouring a donut. But Sherlock's eyes kept darting back and forth between the three, like a chirping bird in a melon field, silently savoring the melon of their clash. So far, Tony and Black Egg were tied at 1-1. Seeing Sherlock's spectacled demeanor, everyone felt a little overwhelmed, especially Black Egg, whose lips twitched. After a moment, he addressed Sherlock, who remained seated. Mr. Sherlock, if you don't mind, could you please sit across from me? Your Uncle Tony and I have something to discuss. While the words were a request, Black Egg's tone was less of a request and more of an order. Sherlock didn't mind, though. After all, as a fun-loving person, there was no reason to refuse a front-row seat. So, Sherlock obediently picked up his donut box, stood up, walked across, and squeezed Tony into the seat inside. Tony, clad in his armor, looked at his nephew helplessly, feeling a sense of confusion. He possessed unparalleled abilities, yet he remained so cowardly in the face of such a situation. Tony couldn't understand. In reality, Sherlock was simply afraid of trouble, especially with Black Egg. It had to be said that he was practically the most despicable person in the entire Marvel universe. You never knew what he had in store. Add to that the lurking presence of Hydra and SHIELD, and to Sherlock, he was like a gigantic, slimy toad. While it didn't bite or inflict fatal wounds, it was certainly a nuisance. Seeing Sherlock squeeze Tony into the inner seat, Black Egg sighed for no apparent reason and also squeezed into the innermost seat. Black Widow readily followed suit and sat next to Black Egg. The originally spacious seats became noticeably cramped after 4 people squeezed in. Both Black Egg and Tony felt the same way, and without hesitation, the two began their second exchange of blows. Sherlock listened for a moment before losing interest and focusing on the donut in his hand. After all, Black Egg was using the same gimmicks from the movies. Something about your father founding SHIELD, or something like that, all the while implying that SHIELD is your home. Sherlock simply curled his lip in disdain. He'd never thought of Black Egg signing up for a class taught by a top-tier instructor like that, but he'd never heard of such a lack of passion and motivation, and his excuses were so lame. While it was common for sons to inherit their father's business, Sherlock hadn't heard of SHIELD's tradition. Black Egg's intention seemed to imply that Tony was also trying to join the great cause of SHIELD. Tony, no fool, was a fool. Faced with Black Egg's charisma, which couldn't even match 1/10 of the top-tier instructors, he curled his lip in disdain and launched into his own verbal attack. As the exchange between the two gradually devolved into a back and forth, Sherlock lost interest. While Sherlock had lost interest in both Black Egg and Tony, that didn't mean anyone else had lost interest in Sherlock either. A prime example of this was Black Widow, who had already adopted the perspective of a big sister. Out of her own bad taste, Black Widow saw Sherlock's attention shift from eating the melon to the donuts in his hand, and she could no longer suppress her inner desire to tease Sherlock, the innocent little boy. She quietly touched Sherlock's leg with her foot under the table. Sherlock was obviously stunned after feeling someone touch his leg. When he looked up, he was greeted by Black Widow's eyes as springy as water. Chapter 74 The Dispute Begins, Part 2. Faced with Black Widow's blatant, undisguised teasing, Sherlock got goosebumps and shuddered violently. Mom was right, boys had to protect themselves when they were out there. Although Sherlock liked older sisters, that didn't mean he liked a grandmother. Black Widow's figure and looks weren't bad, even better than Scarlett Johansson, who played Black Widow before she traveled through time, but unfortunately, Black Widow wasn't Sherlock's type. Looking at Black Widow's watery eyes and the foot that kept rubbing against his calf, Sherlock put down the donut in his hand and took a deep breath. His expression became extremely serious as he looked at Black Widow, who was courting death. Women, they only slow down my one drawing speed. Look at the 12-way spring kick. As a fighter who had received military training from his beastly uncles, and with Sherlock's Dragon Nation identity before traveling through time, although he had never actually seen what the 12-way spring kick looked like, he could at least imitate it. Feeling Sherlock's legs begin to move beneath the table, Black Widow thought the boy across from her had finally given up on her teasing and was about to move away, but the next second, Sherlock's legs surged towards her with a powerful move. Sherlock didn't exert any force, but the feeling of her legs being locked was enough to make Black Widow, even for her experience, feel a bit overwhelmed. The tender expression on her face froze, then turned into a look of deep surprise. She looked up with a look that said, "What's wrong with you?" She was greeted by Sherlock's smug look, as if to say, "You're no good at this? You dare challenge me? You're an agent of SHIELD." That smug look made Black Widow furious. She could understand the boy's lack of understanding, but the idea of him locking her legs in and taunting her was something she couldn't stand. They immediately broke free of Sherlock's attacks and began sparring with him under the table, using their own techniques. On one side, Tony and Black Egg exchanged words, while on the other, Black Widow and Black Sherlock sat obediently, smiling. But beneath the table, their long legs danced, leaving after images as they engaged in a back-and-forth exchange, their movements unsurprisingly imbued with the martial arts. Their expressions were so intense that none of the four busy figures noticed the waiter at the nearby bar, looking at the table with a look of astonishment. Especially since Black Widow and Sherlock, sitting outside, were still battling under the table. The waiter at the bar had already opened his phone and dialed 911. If the fight between the two dared to move from under the table to above, the waiter swore he would press the call button without hesitation. After all, their kicks were so imbued with the martial arts that the waiter's legs ached just watching. As time passed, Sherlock gradually began to lose ground to Black Widow. After all, Black Widow was older, had more experience, and had fought more battles than Sherlock had eaten. Sherlock gradually fell into disadvantage, and Black Widow finally found a floor and locked his legs. No matter how much Sherlock struggled, he could not break free of Black Widow's lock. On the table, Black Widow looked at the surprised Sherlock with a smug smile, as if to say, "Young man, you are still a little bit inexperienced." Seeing Black Widow's smug look, Sherlock turned over in anger and stopped struggling. He just accepted defeat and grabbed the donuts on the table and started eating again. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to want to continue, Black Widow gradually grew bored and released her leg lock on Sherlock's legs. Just when Sherlock wanted to show Black Widow a lesson in the true meaning of everything is fair in war, Black Egg and Tony changed the topic and turned to Sherlock. Mr. Sherlock, faced with Black Egg's summons, Sherlock temporarily abandoned his attempt at a show of deception. Turning to look at Black Egg, who sat beside Black Egg, he slowly asked a question. Seeing Black Egg staring at him intently with one eye, Sherlock abandoned his playful thoughts and looked at Black Egg, awaiting his inquiry. Seeing Sherlock's expression, which read, "What's up?" Nick Fury no longer hesitated and directly asked the question he wanted to know. Mr. Sherlock, could you explain where you've been for the past month? There's no traffic record showing you opening your gun shop, and there's no trace of you anywhere in the shop. Even your social media accounts show no sign of you, and your phone has had no signal for a whole month. Hearing Nick Fury's words, Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise. He slammed the table, glaring at Nick Fury across from him and demanded, "Holy crap! Black-brained egg! You're spying on me." It would have been fine if Sherlock hadn't said it, but the moment the word black-brained egg came out, Nick Fury's one remaining eye widened, staring at Sherlock with a glint of shock, confusion, and a hint of grievance. The originally serious topic was thrown off by Sherlock's black-brained egg. Nick Fury could have sworn it was the first time in all his years as an agent that he didn't know how to continue the conversation. Puff, puff, two bursts of laughter, leaving Nick Fury, sitting in his seat, stunned and aggrieved, even more aggrieved. One came from Tony, the other from Black Widow, who was standing beside him. While Sherlock and Nick Fury often called Nick Fury Black-brained egg in private, Tony had never called him that in person. Black Widow's laughter was simply a chore, a perfect example of what it meant to say, "I've been rigorously trained to never laugh unless I can't hold it back." Feeling your boss's serious, questioning gaze, a hint of doubt and a touch of grievance, Black Widow took a long time to wave to Nick Fury. "Sorry, boss, I just remembered something interesting." Nick Fury rolled his eyes at Black Widow's explanation. "Your explanation is worse than no explanation at all." He no longer bothered about the name, staring intently at Sherlock, as if waiting for his explanation. Faced with Nick Fury's question, Sherlock was naturally unfazed and gave a long-prepared answer. "Where else could I go? I'm making a magic potion. Oh, and my dear Uncle Tony, because Mr. Black Egg's surveillance of me is really annoying, next time they buy potions from me, I'll increase the price by 30%. Tony was naturally happy to watch his nephew's request and happily agreed. "No problem, my dear nephew." Seeing the uncle and nephew singing the same tune, even Nick Fury, known as the King of Spies, couldn't help but break down. Fuck. Chapter 75, her destroying the house. Nick Fury himself had no idea how he'd left the small donut shop. The only thing that stuck with him, and which he firmly adhered to, was a single conviction: he hated naughty kids, especially one named Sherlock. Black Widow, however, was in high spirits, especially since her boss had a new nickname, and she couldn't resist sharing it with her colleagues. After the two S.H.I.E.L.D. agents left, Sherlock and Tony had no desire to continue eating. They packed up their remaining donuts and headed back to Tony's beachfront villa in Sherlock's pickup truck. Upon entering, Tony rushed into the basement, clutching the treats Black Egg had given him. As for Sherlock, he unceremoniously took over Tony's living room, turned on Tony's massive TV, and began watching his favorite show, Finding a Dad. Sherlock, unfazed, hadn't forgotten the skincare products he'd bought for his future aunt in Asgard. During the commercial break, Sherlock called Pepper Potts. He had originally wanted to ask when Pepper would be back from get off work, but unfortunately, Tony had already handed over most of the company's business to her. She was now incredibly busy, currently on a business trip and unable to return. However, Pepper did thank Sherlock over the phone for the gift he had brought them, though she had no idea it came from a distant planet. Upon hearing that Pepper was away, Sherlock could only pout helplessly. Following Pepper's instructions, he placed the skincare products he had bought from Asgard in Pepper's room, leaving a note explaining the source and purpose of the cosmetics. Shortly after Sherlock returned to the sofa, watching a show on TV and laughing, Tony rushed upstairs, dragging Sherlock with him and asking him to use his magic to help him retrieve a model of Stark Industries from his office. In response to Tony's request, Sherlock angrily opened a portal, revealing Tony's office. Tony marveled at the convenience of this unprecedented magic and began moving things. Shortly after Tony moved the entire campus model into the basement, he arrived in the living room, wearing noise-canceling headphones and carrying a large electric pickaxe, and began blasting away at the floor. While Sherlock knew Tony had been inspired by his father's discovery of a harmless new element, his impulsiveness made him look like a housewrecker. From Sherlock's perspective, Tony had simply gone down to the basement with the model before returning with his pickaxe to begin demolishing the house. If Tony's beach house weren't a standalone building with no neighbors nearby, he'd probably already been complaining. Even Sherlock felt a little frustrated by the noise of Tony's electric pickaxe, and he whipped out his wand to cast a silencing spell on the pickaxe. The electric pickaxe, which was originally making a clanging noise, was still working, but it had become silent. Tony, who was wearing noise-canceling headphones, quickly noticed the difference. He took off his headphones and tried the silent electric pickaxe again. His eyes lit up and he turned to look at Sherlock. But what greeted Tony was Sherlock's expression, as if he was looking at her, as if to say, "Are you sure you want to demolish the house, and after you do, Pepper won't beat you to death?" Looking at Sherlock's eyes, Tony could only helplessly explain to Sherlock that he had discovered a new element. Facing Tony's explanation, Sherlock's eyes looking at her became more intense. After Tony finished explaining, Sherlock asked a question he wanted to ask during the movie. "Why don't you get some sleep and then go straight to the company or the particle accelerator lab tomorrow morning? Why do you have to go tear things down?" Sherlock had wondered this while watching the movie. While he had to admit, watching Tony tear things down for scientific research in the movie was certainly exciting, seeing it in person only made him feel helpless. In response to Sherlock's question, Tony simply rolled his eyes, saying Sherlock didn't understand the romance of scientific research. He also didn't want anyone else to know about his synthesis of a new element with a higher energy density. He wanted to be the first person in the world to personally synthesize the new element his father had discovered. With that, Tony, seemingly having a relapse into middle school, pulled Sherlock aside, demanding he use magic to help him. Sherlock glanced at the sky outside, then at the excited Tony, and without hesitation, cast a stunning spell on Tony. Then, he cast a levitation spell, tossing the unconscious Tony onto his bed. Sherlock tolerated the husky's demolition attempt, but he didn't realize what time it was. Who would go out to demolish a house in the middle of the night for scientific research? He'd better sleep. After dealing with Tony, Sherlock yawned and found his guest room, showered, and fell into deep sleep. The next morning, just after daybreak, Sherlock was dragged out of bed by Tony and, without a second thought, forced to work. This made Sherlock complain profusely. Who would force a man to work without even giving him a bite to eat? Even the landlords of the lighthouse country wouldn't have done this. However, Tony ignored Sherlock's complaints and continued to plan how to demolish the house. It must be said that when it comes to demolishing and building houses, Sherlock's mastery of Harry Potter magic is incredibly convenient. Digging holes is just a matter of casting a shattering charm, and pulling strings or other things can be done with a transfiguration charm. Sherlock even managed the final cleanup, and Tony had to admit that Sherlock was the most useful tool he'd ever met. Of course, since Tony had promised to buy him a proper Baja race car, Sherlock willingly fulfilled his duties without complaint. With Sherlock's help, the two of them assembled the particle accelerator in just a week, a task that would have taken a month. This speed was due to Tony's need to order and deliver the parts, otherwise, it could have been even faster. It was also during this demolition that Tony discovered many of his father's amazing gadgets in his warehouse, including the unfinished Captain America shield. Just as Sherlock was examining the unfinished shield, the doorbell to Tony's villa rang. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.